On that decisive day, a new heir adorned the royal palace. His Majesty the King entered the room as soon as the baby was born. He had been waiting curiously to see if his child was a girl or a boy. However, as soon as the tiny baby's figure caught his eye with hair and eyes as black as night, it was considered a sign of a curse upon the land he ruled. Tonight, a boy, shrouded in shadows since his birth. However, unbeknownst to anyone, a fateful encounter was approaching. The first prince of the kingdom of Luvil, Luerberg Luvil, announced in front of everyone that from now on, he and Charlotte Mersenne were no longer engaged. The noblewoman from Mersenne, standing in front of him with 2 glasses in hand, jumped in surprise. She truly did not know the reason for the end of their engagement. Luer considered it ridiculous, because he couldn't think that she already knew about all the cruelties Charlotte had done to Lucille. The girl whose name was mentioned peeked from behind Luer's back. Lucille was also her classmate, who was born at the same time as them. Charlotte herself truly did not understand what the prince was saying. Seeing her confused expression made Luer even more emotional and consider her just playing around, while informing her that Charlotte had slandered, intimidated, and as if that wasn't enough, she also pushed Lucille down the stairs. Charlotte denied the accusation, but Luer didn't want to hear it, then ordered Filger and Dord to capture her as planned. Charlotte's body was chained so she couldn't move. Even her neck was fitted with a collar, as if she were a criminal. The girl explained that there was a big misunderstanding here. Luer still didn't want to hear it, because he had seen her crimes. As a former fiancé, he admitted he would be merciful to Charlotte and give her a chance to apologize to Lucille. Charlotte refused, especially since she was the one who had been slandered here. Suddenly, a burst of laughter broke the tension. Luer immediately turned with annoyance because his younger brother was laughing at a time like this. Alfred apologized for his rude behavior. It's just that Luer truly met his expectations. He admitted he couldn't hold it back. Whispers from the guests began to be heard as Alfred stepped closer to the source of the spectacle. The child considered cursed, with pitch-black hair and pitch-black eyes. There was no doubt at all that he was Alfred Berg Luvil, the 3rd son of the Kingdom of Luvil. He pointed towards Lucille and said that she was a commoner who didn't know her place. He had to say that the girl always annoyed him. Luer warned that even though Alfred was the 3rd prince, he wouldn't let him get away with his arrogance. The sight made the guests assume that Alfred was the one treating Lucille badly, because he was the cursed prince. There were also those who thought that Alfred was trying to frame Charlotte. They never thought that the kind-hearted Charlotte would do such a thing to a commoner. Charlotte was silent, unable to say a word. Luer said he would never forgive Alfred for daring to do cruel things to Lucille. Alfred said that it was truly unbecoming of his brother, especially since Luer had no proof that he had done anything. Luer assured that Alfred wouldn't get away, because he had just admitted his mistake himself with his earlier words. Alfred asked back if he had really admitted it. In fact, he was just enjoying this development and never admitted any wrongdoing. Luer told him to shut up, because if anyone knew how to hide tracks, it was definitely Alfred. Alfred himself could only smile satisfied hearing it. Luer wasn't wrong about his skill in planning, but it was never needed, because any evidence of the mistakes he made never existed from the beginning. Today's meeting marked the opportunity for his brother, Luer, to enter the 3rd year of high school. If the event was to announce the breaking of his engagement, as a noble, Alfred should have been informed. But he didn't receive such news, meaning it was Luer's personal decision. Seizing the opportunity when their father was away, just to treat the noblewoman as a criminal due to a student quarrel. This was all too absurd. Charlotte finally spoke up, because Luer was clearly not making a rational judgment. If Luer's heart was no longer hers, then she accepted full responsibility and would step aside gracefully. However, this engagement was not just a verbal agreement. This engagement was formalized between the royal family and the ducal family. Without mutual agreement, let alone Luer's personal feelings alone, the engagement could not be dissolved. Luer shouted, telling her to shut up, because he and Lucille had shared a bond of true love. He would kick that old tradition aside. Alfred folded his arms watching, because this was becoming quite problematic. His brother Luer held the highest power when their father was away. Of course, no one could match him, not even the Mersenne family. Charlotte was now truly alone. The only way to resolve this situation was if Alfred took all the blame. That was the role of the villain. He then asked what next step Luer would take, and asked if his brother planned to detain Alfred for unproven crimes. Luer cursed, because it seemed he had to give a little pain to teach Alfred a lesson. He then called the guards to capture him. As the guards approached, Alfred immediately jumped onto the large chandelier above. Lure was flustered. Even though the guards had magic and spears, he asked them to do something. The guards refused because they had honorable guests at this party. If even one person got hurt, it would be a serious problem for the royal family. Lure hissed, unable to argue. Finally, he asked them to secure the balcony and not let Alfred leave this area. Alfred himself just swung silently on the chandelier until his gaze fell on Charlotte, who seemed to have escaped safely. He sighed because the girl might have avoided direct public humiliation. In the midst of his distracted focus, an attack hit the chandelier, and Alfred didn't have time to dodge. He hissed because his hand was burned. Fortunately, his other hand quickly grabbed the railing on the second floor, while the chandelier fell. While climbing the railing, Alfred thought to retreat because Lure had lost his sanity. The ring on his middle finger began to glow. He then bid farewell and wished the best for his brother. A big explosion occurred and Alfred's body was thrown floating in the air. The guards didn't know what to do and waited for orders if they should pursue. However, Lure turned away and told them to stop because he knew where Alfred went. While the other guards were ordered to clean this place and escort the fleeing guests to the front gate. Lucille called Lure worriedly, while the young man was filled with anger towards his brother. Alfred landed on the fortress because it seemed he managed to avoid those guards. The sound of applause then diverted his gaze, followed by a praise sentence from a girl who laughed cheerfully. Alfred really caused a commotion again today. The young man then immediately landed on the ground and approached Machina, who seemed to have been watching since earlier. The girl raised 2 fingers in a peace sign while saying that everything Alfred did was perfect. Alfred looked gallant when acting as the mastermind of evil. The young man himself complained because he felt that wasn't the right way to greet his master. Machina felt she had tried her best to support her lord. Plus, regarding Alfred's escape from that place, she had been waiting here since the day before. Alfred also said that she was a commendable servant. The young man then caught red-handed that Machina just wanted to be lazy. The conversation shifted to news about Charlotte. Machina had assigned guards to watch her, but she hadn't received any news yet, so most likely the noble girl was safe. But still, this was good for Alfred. He had just saved his first love like a true knight in shining armor. However, Machina immediately stopped praising as soon as Alfred hissed while punching the wall. The young man asked how far Machina planned to dig into his past. Machina admitted it didn't take long to get there, when she was engaged to Lure, and Alfred thought he had to let her go. But this was a big change in an event, and Alfred really succeeded. However, tonight's situation wasn't that simple. Machina then asked her lord's plan now, and offered to just take Charlotte for himself. Alfred became annoyed because he kept getting teased, while Machina bid farewell to return to her room and told the young man to sleep too while giggling. Machina quickly left while saying good night, leaving Alfred who sighed and thought about the girl's words. For him, this wasn't like first love. The next morning, the chirping of birds accompanied the shining sun warming the morning. After causing a commotion at the new school year party at the palace, who would have thought Alfred would also damage that place? The young man sitting on the sofa while scratching his head admitted that last night's incident was unavoidable. He spoke with his father through the king's pigeon. The animal was created from magic, where users could communicate long distance through the pigeon. If he didn't take that action, Alfred didn't know what would happen to Charlotte now. Besides, it was a good way to create the impression that Charlotte was framed by the third prince. The bird sighed and felt he had to praise Alfred for saving Charlotte. Anyway, the pigeon then flew towards Alfred and pecked him while questioning the reason for all the nonsense. Evil third prince. And he kept insisting on tarnishing himself. Alfred complained because he felt nothing was wrong. Besides, he would always be the cursed child. It was a bit late for him to start worrying about bad publicity now. Finally, the bird stopped while sighing. He then told Alfred to rejoice, because his father had arranged a match for Alfred. The young man considered this a cruel joke, where the cursed child was given a marriage proposal. However, it was clear that his father was not joking at all about this. The bird admitted he had learned from the recent incident, and Alfred needed to be watched closely. The young man judged his father very cruel for really using state authority for that. The bird didn't understand what his son implied, but for information, he initiated contact with them, and they willingly agreed. Alfred really couldn't fathom it. Machina then interrupted and informed that Alfred's fiancée had arrived. The young man jumped, but the pigeon praised his servant. Mangacap had known since the beginning. She then turned and invited someone who had been waiting to enter. The one referred to as Alfred's fiancée was none other than Charlotte. His father saw that Alfred was starting to like the girl, making the young man then grip the pigeon and ask its purpose here. The pigeon had to admit Alfred had made the right decision. To shift the false rumor about Charlotte bullying student Lucille to Charlotte was framed by the third prince. That is, hiding it with a new lie. However, Alfred couldn't change the fact that the first prince ended the engagement. Charlotte's situation was already critical. However, it couldn't be denied that Charlotte was someone who would happily be included in the royal lineage. The mistake in handling this problem was in the hands of the royal capital, so it was only right that they take responsibility. Alfred rubbed his head because he didn't know why. Specifically, it had to be him, and possibly in the end his father became cynical towards him. However, the pigeon mentioned 4 main reasons. First, only Alfred was available. Second, to fulfill Charlotte's wish. Third, his father believed she could be Alfred's reign. As for the last reason, the pigeon said it was just a rumor. Mangacap then raised her hand and apologized for interrupting. Honestly, there was a circulating rumor which showed that Alfred had harbored feelings for Charlotte from the beginning, and he devised a plan to steal his lover from the first prince. At least, that's what the rumor at the academy said. In simple terms, Alfred had stolen his brother's lover. Mangacap giggled, especially seeing the young man's shocked expression. Alfred really couldn't fathom the reality of who stole whom from whom now. Mangacap laughed while explaining that Alfred had stolen Charlotte from Lure. That's what people said. Apparently, the rumor could happen because of what had occurred since that party night. Even though Alfred skipped school and locked himself in his room because he didn't want to see Lure, making him think he was also at fault for letting the rumor spread uncontrollably. However, after thinking about it, he suspected that Lure himself spread the rumor. Mangacap laughed crisply because that guess was spot on. Prince Lure was very angry and said that his brother Alfred, by using Lucille to steal Charlotte for himself. He always acted like that wherever he went. Alfred himself only showed a suffering face while gaping hearing Mangacap's explanation. The maid admitted her ears almost fell off because of it, making Alfred slump. So that was the crux of the matter. They might also use the rumor to formalize the engagement. Alfred didn't understand why his father agreed with Lure's crazy logic, making him get cursed at, even though his father claimed he also followed his own. They could change the story to Charlotte is the victim, kidnapped by the evil third prince. That would be an easy role for him to play. With the pigeon's words making Alfred feel his father was there. Mangacap explained that Charlotte would be the oppressed girl. Then people would pity her and stop considering her a criminal. This time, Alfred punched the table because he couldn't stand his father's plan. Somehow his father and Mangacap could be so relaxed about this. Charlotte would become the fiancée of the cursed child. They wanted to clear Charlotte's name, but her reputation would be even more tarnished, and this wasn't a temporary action to deceive the public. It was a shackle that would bind Charlotte for life. If so, Alfred thought his father should improve his own reputation for the girl's sake. He then cursed because he realized his father had caught him. So this is what he meant by the reign mentioned in the main reasons for his engagement to Charlotte. Damn it, Alfred never asked for anything in this matter. He just played the role given to him. Under normal circumstances, humans are born with 4 magical elements: fire, water, earth, and air. Depending on each individual's talent, they can use several elements, but usually limited to those 4. However, the royal family is a different story. They have a golden power shining from the 5th element, namely ether. This power is what makes the royal family what it is now. However, what was inside Alfred was not ether, but the 6th element, namely Erebos. The same power once used by the night wizard to plunge the world into darkness, which has been a bad omen since ancient times. That's why Alfred isolated himself since childhood. Every time attending noble parties, they avoided Alfred and whispered full of contempt behind his back. That's how his life was. If the king tried to defend Alfred, his reputation would be tarnished. So, he preferred to play the villain. Alfred clenched his fist because he didn't remember ever asking his father to do such a thing. He always said that, making Alfred not hesitate to curse him. The pigeon asked if there was anything else his foolish son wanted to say. Alfred remained silent. The young man then turned to Charlotte and asked if the girl objected. Charlotte admitted that she was the one who wanted to maintain the relationship with the royal family. Charlotte was a special figure for the royal family, even among all the ducal families. One of the reasons was the amount of mana she possessed, but not just that. Her element was known as silver mana. Its nature was very similar to ether, which is the fifth element only possessed by the royal family. Charlotte was not as strong as a noble, but she had unmatched talent. Alfred didn't think there was anyone else more qualified to support the royal family. That's what his father wanted. Once again, Alfred reminded that his brother had publicly ended their engagement not long ago, which might make her worry about men. Mangacaped then reminded him to maintain politeness, because what Alfred did was already excessive. Charlotte clasped her hands and honestly said that she might feel more resistant to the idea if it was with another man, but she had no problem at all if it was Alfred. Seeing the sincere expression with her gentle words made Alfred stunned. The young man remembered now that Charlotte was the only person at the party who didn't care, even though Alfred was the cursed child and approached him. That's why Alfred knew Charlotte trusted him wholeheartedly. Alfred cursed because he couldn't ignore Charlotte. Seeing her lord, who was just silent, Mangacaped whispered calling and reminded that he would only embarrass Charlotte if he ran away now. Alfred told her to shut up, because he already knew. Charlotte herself just stared, not understanding at the two servant and master whispering in front of her. Finally, the young man admitted he was wrong for handling the situation the way he did, then agreed to this business engagement. Charlotte looked happy hearing it, while the pigeons sighed in relief. But Alfred asked them not to misunderstand, because he had no intention of changing his role. He then turned away while saying that being engaged had nothing to do with that, making the gazes of the two girls in the room follow his steps. He stopped at the door threshold before really leaving. He informed that he would continue doing what he had been doing all this time. Silence fell for a few moments after Alfred's departure, until Charlotte, who looked sad, guessed that perhaps Alfred hated her. Mangacaped then laughed and asked her not to worry, then informed that Alfred was not good at expressing himself. According to her, the young man felt 30% worried, 30% confused, and the other 40% happy. Charlotte could judge that Mangacaped seemed to know a lot about Alfred. The maid could only scratch her head while laughing, because she was the one who had served him the longest. Hearing that made Charlotte ask her to tell everything about Alfred. She wanted to know him well. Mangacaped smiled happily because Charlotte came to the right person, because she was a servant who gave everything to serve Alfred, and Charlotte could entrust everything to her. The noble girl was very happy and very grateful. There was a book about a boy who left his small village to defeat the Demon King and become a hero. Maybe it was a cliché story, but Charlotte really appreciated that book. At the age of 7, the little girl hugged her book and glanced here and there at a noble party, until she found Prince Lure, who was then 9 years old. She was very happy. As soon as she approached him, Charlotte immediately thanked him because Lure had sent that picture book. Lure was glad the girl liked it, as was Charlotte. The girl admitted the story was amazing. It would be amazing if she could be friends with the enemy in the end, like in this book. Lure agreed, and there was nothing better than getting along. With that, Charlotte decided when she became queen, she wanted to make everyone in the kingdom live in harmony. Lure hated to say it, but reality didn't work like that. There was nothing wrong with dreaming, but in the end, it was just wishful thinking. A kingdom could never run if its queen had thoughts like that. Charlotte was silent while clutching her book tightly, then agreed with Lure's words. Someone then called Lure, making the child apologize and quickly bid farewell. Charlotte then thought if her dream was nothing more than an aspiration, then this book was the same. She then left her book on one of the tables and ran away, until the book was found by a noble who was taking food. If she wanted to be a worthy queen in this kingdom, Charlotte decided she had to let go of that book. Someone then reminded that the girl had forgotten something, making her steps stop. She then turned with a child trying to interfere in her business, and apparently it was Lure's younger brother. She quickly admitted she didn't need that book. Alfred didn't know what was wrong. Besides, it was a good book. His innocent gaze looked at the book in his hand. Charlotte knew the book was good, and Alfred wasn't a bad child, but she hoped the boy would leave her alone right now. Alfred then questioned why she didn't want the book anymore. The thought that Alfred was like that picture book made her apologize and turn around. She then concluded that it would be difficult to realize the aspirations in that book, because someone who would become queen should leave behind such naivety. Alfred then said that Charlotte was just repeating what Lure said to her. Seeing Charlotte immediately silent and gaping made Alfred realize his guess was correct. He explained that the chances were never zero, but nothing would change if not tried. Seeing Alfred flipping through the book pages, Charlotte remembered that his words were a quote from her favorite character. Alfred closed his book again and said he also liked this book, then returned it to the girl. Then said that the people who make the world a better place are always those who have big visions. There is no word too late to give up after being able to challenge oneself. Alfred said that while walking past her, he would look forward to seeing Charlotte's journey, then waved goodbye, making the girl rethink. Charlotte smiled, remembering her first meeting with Alfred. Mangacaped then called her and informed that they would turn right here. They had changed clothes to disguise and search for Alfred's whereabouts in the middle of the city. Mangacaped herself already knew that Alfred was always here, until her head bumped into someone, making Charlotte immediately ask about her condition. They were suddenly startled because apparently they were caught red-handed by Alfred, who immediately interrogated their presence. Mangacaped still acted calm and said it was just a coincidence. However, Alfred knew they weren't coincidentally strolling in a back alley far from the palace. Charlotte then asked Alfred not to blame Mangacaped, because she was the one who asked the maid to accompany her, although Mangacaped also interfered a little. Alfred then asked for an explanation from Mangacaped. The maid immediately pushed Charlotte forward because she said she wanted to know more about Alfred. So Mangacaped thought they would join in witnessing his brilliant daily life. It would be better for both of them to deepen their understanding of each other now after being engaged. Alfred then said that Charlotte didn't need to do that, just because they were engaged. However, Charlotte felt as his fiancée, it was her responsibility to learn more about Alfred. The young man judged Charlotte always serious as usual. Charlotte immediately explained that she only knew a little about the outside world and felt they might consider her boring, but she promised to improve that aspect of her character. Alfred then immediately flustered, explaining that he didn't mean to say Charlotte was boring and asked for Mangacaped's help. The maid whispered to Charlotte that Alfred was the type who was neat and polite, pure and curvy body. And coincidentally, Charlotte fit that criteria perfectly. Mangacaped meant the girl had a big gift, which was her body. So, she asked Charlotte to be more confident. Alfred cursed and chased her to teach her a lesson for what she had told Charlotte. The noble girl praised them who got along and had known each other for a long time. Mangacaped then said her idea to close the distance between Charlotte and Alfred by changing how they addressed each other, through a nickname. Alfred then complained because Mangacaped came up with a weird idea again, but Charlotte really thought of a suitable nickname. Shyly, she called him Al, and immediately made Alfred freeze. Mangacaped then expressed her other good idea. She offered for Alfred to call Charlotte by the name Char. The young man immediately jumped as if struck by lightning, as if Mangacaped wanted to kill him with those sweet ideas. Charlotte herself liked that nickname, making Mangacaped tease Alfred even more. The young man rejected it outright, then turned his face as if annoyed, though more precisely he felt embarrassed. It was really embarrassing to do that at this time. Charlotte then apologized, then complained that it was a boring suggestion from a boring woman. Mangacaped then warned Alfred not to bully women. The young man then agreed because he was forced. Then he turned his back on the two girls and called Charlotte by the name Chat. The called girl responded very cheerfully. Mangacaped was happy seeing them, but Alfred had to try hard to calm himself because this was not good for his heart. Charlotte asked Alfred's purpose for coming to the city today. The young man admitted there was no clear reason, but Mangacaped informed that Alfred came to buy embarrassing books with women's covers like the book she showed and found in Alfred's room. The maid sighed because she wasn't surprised to see something like a saint and nun in it, but she didn't expect to see a maid appear. Charlotte then hurriedly read the book, making Alfred angry because Mangacaped brought the book here. Alfred snatched the book from Charlotte's hand and forbade her to read trash, because it was inappropriate. The noble girl was shocked, but then she called Alfred and said precisely because she was his fiancée, Charlotte felt the need to know Alfred better. Even asked permission to see the book. Alfred yelled because the book was something she didn't need to know. After some time passed, Alfred sat with a limp body. He told Charlotte and Mangacaped to hurry back because their business was done here. Not forgetting, he also asked them to forget everything about the book. Mangacaped asked if Alfred really wanted to buy more lewd books. In his entire life, Alfred admitted he had never wanted to fire Mangacaped like today. The maid still asked the reason Alfred didn't tell them where he was going. Both planned to join whatever happened. Alfred then said he wasn't going to a special place, but rather he was gathering information. A merchant responded to the gossip he was asked about and felt that this must be about Prince Lur's engagement. He thought the third prince was the one to blame as usual. He heard that Alfred kidnapped the Duke's daughter or did other vile things. Alfred laughed and praised the version of himself that the merchant was blaming. Charlotte stared in confusion, while Machina just smiled. As soon as Alfred approached, they pretended to be choosing fruits. The young man had finished with this area. They even gave him apples, so he threw one of his apples to Charlotte, while the girl made sure that the young man had just been gathering information. Alfred admitted he stopped by several shops he often visited to ask them many things, while eating his apple. Like asking if there were any suspicious people lurking around, or how Lur's reputation was among the people. They would obtain more accurate information by asking directly. Charlotte was busy interrogating Alfred while chasing his steps, while Machina rubbed her apple on her clothes before eating it. Alfred's main purpose today was to investigate how society was talking about the broken engagement. He intended to go alone to check it. Meanwhile, Machina taught Charlotte to bite the apple directly, surprising her because she wasn't used to it. The noble girl glowed staring at her apple while imagining they could eat apples without cutting them. Alfred smiled seeing the girl's expression and felt he didn't need to worry about anything. He was glad this could distract Charlotte. Finally, they arrived in front of the Adventurers Guild building. Alfred immediately opened the door. Adventurers traveled everywhere for work, so information tended to gather in places like this. Charlotte was stunned seeing the real guild, just like in her picture book. A receptionist girl named Maisie carrying 4 glasses of drinks then greeted them. She was a bit surprised because Alfred was the type who didn't usually travel with friends. Alfred greeted back and ordered 1 table. Because the guild was very crowded, there was only 1 table left at the very back. Apparently, Kevin and the others had succeeded in completing the dungeon mission, saying that it was good news, then bid farewell and promised to stop by later. Alfred pointed to the quest board in a corner, the spiked mugs, and all the alcohol bottles with different colors. Charlotte kept scanning her gaze with full admiration, because she had only ever seen all this in books. The guild house also functioned as a bar. As soon as they reached their table, Alfred informed that there were other adventurers here celebrating their success. Machina, who had already taken her seat and was holding the menu book, gave the item to Charlotte and invited her to order whatever she wanted. As soon as she read the menu book, Charlotte couldn't believe they could eat meat straight from the bone. There was also herbal salad. She admitted she had only read this menu in stories before. Charlotte was truly amazed and quite liked this one. Alfred whispered to Machina and asked if Charlotte was really here because she wanted to get to know him better. Machina told him not to act silly now, because Charlotte was really doing all that. Machina felt Charlotte might feel sad after her engagement was cancelled, so she thought this would also be a good change of atmosphere for her. She thought this was hard for Alfred to understand considering how dense the young man was, so this very caring maid thought it would help. If Alfred wanted to show his gratitude, Machina asked him not to hesitate to shower her with praise and raise her salary when he did. Alfred confirmed it and was very grateful while bowing respectfully, making Machina freeze with sweat pouring down. The girl didn't know what had just happened. So Alfred explained that Machina always ran around for his sake and supported him by doing all the things he couldn't do. He really appreciated her hard work. Alfred smiled widely because he decided he should be honest with her once in a while. However, Machina turned her face away and ignored the young man, making Alfred question her attitude, even though Machina herself had asked Alfred to praise her. Unfortunately, Machina would only get confused if Alfred said things like that. Now it was Alfred who was confused getting a reaction like that. Charlotte was also confused seeing them. Kevin came greeting and hugged Alfred, whom he hadn't seen in a long time. He then made small talk about the party held because they succeeded in completing the dungeon mission. Kevin then switched to Alfred, who came here with a girl on each arm. He asked permission to borrow one of those flowers. Charlotte immediately apologized for the late introduction, saying she was Alfred's fiancée. However, before clearly mentioning her name, Machina hurriedly covered her mouth. Hearing the name Charl, Kevin guessed that she was like the girl everyone was talking about, making Alfred hurriedly correct him. He said his fiancée's name was Char. Kevin immediately smiled happily to meet her, as did Charlotte. He guessed the hooded girl in front of him must be very down right now. He meant her name was very similar to that noble girl who bullied commoners. They froze hearing that sentence. Kevin then sat down while roughly placing his mug on the table. He just couldn't forgive Charlotte. He admitted he didn't know how important this ducal family was, but judged that they were rotten to the roots for bullying commoners just to vent their anger. Kevin guessed the girl did evil because Prince Lure ended the engagement with her. Charlotte could only bow her head hearing the narration, making Alfred immediately hold her hand. Kevin called the cursed third prince really annoying for wanting Charlotte too. He doubted the kingdom would be fine with that child in the royal family. At least they still had the first Princess Luce, the second Prince Robert, the second Princess Sophie, and the most popular of all, the first Prince Lure. Of course, the people didn't need that vile third prince. Kevin even hoped the third prince and the ducal daughter would just run away and die in a ditch somewhere. Many people would be happy to see them go. However, hearing too many opinions like that, the young man looked scared, but then he laughed, though in his heart regretting letting his emotions take over. He immediately denied and admitted that the gossip Kevin conveyed was different from what he heard. Alfred himself wouldn't feel like this if Kevin was only talking about him, but he even cursed Charlotte too. Besides the third prince, Alfred admitted hearing that the ducal daughter became a victim in all this. Kevin looked unbelieving. Kevin was at the center of the adventurer community. He knew everyone. If there were some unpleasant rumors circulating, then Alfred just needed to counter them with better ones. Alfred continued talking with Kevin and several other important guild members, while spreading favorable rumors wherever he went. The narrative that the ducal daughter never bullied commoners, he dumped all the blame on the third prince, and so on, kept echoing. That should have been the limit of the rounds he did that day. But Charlotte's footsteps felt heavy as they walked home. On the way, Alfred walking ahead didn't comment anything, until Charlotte said the young man hadn't done anything wrong. Alfred then apologized for the incident back then. Now he knew Charlotte came here just to find a new atmosphere, and what he could say was for Charlotte not to let it bother her. The noble girl fell silent while clenching both her hands, then apologized because she couldn't comply with Alfred's request. Charlotte's voice trembled as she said those words. Upon arriving at the palace, Alfred shouted in his room because he had a feeling Charlotte would say that. The girl looked like she was having fun, so Alfred was really off guard. Even though he knew the rumor would be the talk of the whole city, and Charlotte's mood worsened on the way home. Alfred kept squeezing his head while sitting at the work desk, and thinking that maybe he shouldn't meet Charlotte for a while. At the military training ground, the soldiers appeared to be training, but then Alfred was surprised to find Charlotte here. The girl immediately greeted, while Makina silently watched from behind her. Alfred turned his face away, then asked if there was any other better activity besides following him, and shouldn't Charlotte go study, as usual. He then cursed in his heart because his words were harsher than intended. Charlotte jumped. She realized she would skip lessons to become a queen. The atmosphere became awkward, making Charlotte herself unable to continue her sentence. Makina accused Alfred of having no wisdom. Finally, they just sat silently and watched the soldiers training from the terrace, until Charlotte gathered the courage to ask what the young man was doing here. Alfred honestly answered that he was just watching the soldiers train. Even though it didn't improve his skills, he was here to assess his country's military strength with his own eyes. They never knew what might happen on the battlefield. So, understanding the soldiers' strength could affect the chances of victory, especially when the planned strategy failed. For example, Alfred pointed to a soldier there swinging a sword. He was calm and stable when striking. His strikes were accurate, but his reflexes were a bit slow. A slow fighter would have trouble facing fast enemies, while the one next to him was skilled at approaching his enemies, but his attacks were messy and his foot movements made him easy to read. Therefore, his biggest challenge was how easily he could be countered. Charlotte herself couldn't imagine Alfred knowing all the soldiers' stories. The young man admitted he only knew their basic info. Even so, he didn't have everything compared to beginners. Makina then teased Alfred by calling him perverted, making the young man annoyed. Suddenly Lure shouted at Alfred because he finally found him and warned that his younger brother couldn't escape him anymore. Alfred was shocked by Lure's unexpected arrival. Even Charlotte and Makina hid behind a pillar. Alfred could use blinding magic and escape, but it seemed Lure didn't intend to stop until he caught him. Alfred certainly didn't want to deal with this, but he felt he had to face it now. His hands clenched tightly, then asked Makina to take care of Charlotte for him. The maid of course agreed, but was surprised her master would fight Lure. She thought Alfred would disappear in a puff of smoke. The young man didn't respond, but immediately turned when Charlotte called. He then asked her not to worry seeing the anxious gaze, and admitted he was used to dealing with him while waving his hand and leaving. Alfred scratched his head while sighing, then asked what his brother had done. Lure didn't like being called that name, even though he had been warned many times. Alfred confirmed it, then asked what Lure wanted and what was so important that he needed to stop the training. Lure looked very fired up because Alfred's actions the other day were the peak of stupidity and caused the people's trust in the royal family to waver. It was unforgivable if the royal family bullied innocent commoners like Lucille. As fellow nobles, Lure decided he would be the one to shape his brother's behavior. Alfred sighed because Lure was bringing this up again and asked for proof. Lure was very frustrated hearing that casual statement. Alfred still asked for proof regarding him bullying innocent Lucille. If what Lure said was true, the king wouldn't tolerate it and he would definitely be in prison already. Lure didn't want to hear any explanation. He threw a wooden sword and told Alfred to pick it up. Lure threatened that if his brother still pretended to be stupid, he would give this lesson with a real sword. Alfred did pick up the sword, then broke it and said that sounded boring. Lure then brought up Alfred calling himself a man from the Rière family. Alfred confirmed that he just didn't want to fight his brother, making Lure even angrier and cursing his brother for thinking he intended to humiliate him. Alfred finally agreed. Because Lure forced it, he decided he would practice with him, but with conditions. Lure had to use that wooden training sword, while he used a real sword. The soldiers called him a coward and shameless, but Lure didn't mind and accepted the condition. They asked Lure not to follow it, because it was too dangerous. Lure asked them not to worry, because this coward wasn't his opponent. Alfred immediately praised his usual noble attitude and asked what would happen if his hand slipped during the fight. Lure admitted he didn't care. The two brothers faced each other in the middle of the training field. Lure immediately attacked, making his brother have to struggle to hold it off. Not enough with that, he kept attacking relentlessly. Many soldiers supported him to defeat Alfred. The young man called the Cursed Child didn't give up holding off the attacks. Charlotte and Machina were also tense watching it. The soldiers smiled happily seeing Alfred cornered and kept trying to defend. Charlotte grew more worried seeing the sword used by her fiancé seemed to have nicks on its blade. Its stitches were already covered in pain, but the blade would break sooner or later. Machina couldn't believe Charlotte could see all that from where they stood. Apparently she had very good eyesight, making the maid gape in amazement. It seemed Alfred was also blocking Lure's attacks with the same part of the sword every time. Charlotte became curious about what her fiancé was planning. Lure exerted all his strength, making Alfred's sword break. Charlotte grew even more anxious. Lure also pushed his brother, making him fall. The soldiers cheered seeing Lure successfully cut steel with a wooden training sword and praised him even more. Charlotte didn't understand how Alfred could lose with weapons. Even so, Alfred insisted he didn't feel the need to apologize because it seemed like what he said before, that his brother had no proof. Seeing his still arrogant brother, Lure then opened his gloves by biting them. If so, he gave another idea. With this, Lure officially challenged Alfred to a duel. In that duel, if Lure won, it would save him from the trouble of chasing his brother and digging up the evidence he was hiding. Alfred would also admit his mistake and apologize publicly together with Charlotte. With terms like that, Alfred felt doubtful he could comply. Alfred revealed the fact that Lure, who was nothing compared to him, remained unchanged. However, Lure emphasized that by refusing the duel, it meant Alfred was hiding something. His brother kept insisting there was no proof, but his attitude itself spoke volumes. Frankly, by accepting this duel, actually Alfred wouldn't gain anything. In fact, he would lose everything. Defeat would automatically consider him guilty, even if innocent. But if he refused, this would only create more suspicion and a truly unreasonable situation. The logic wasn't very reasonable, but acceptable to the crowd of soldiers. Alfred cursed in his heart while clenching his fist because he had been cornered. Finally, he accepted the duel challenge, but he also proposed a condition. If Alfred won, Lure had to release Charlotte from the criminal marking collar she was wearing, because the key was held by his brother. That collar was put on Charlotte, where this item was a restraint intended for criminals, which also functioned as a magical seal. As long as the girl wore it, she couldn't use any magic. Even if temporary, it must be difficult for her, because the power she had honed for so long was sealed like this. This collar had no main key, so using the key Lure had was the only choice to remove it. Now was Alfred's chance to negotiate directly. He provoked him not to refuse, by saying that Lur had something to hide. Thus, Lur agreed to release the collar if his brother won, but he reminded that it didn't mean Alfred had a chance from the start. The duel would be held 2 weeks from now. Until then, Lur told his brother to prepare for what was coming. Charlotte chased Makina's steps in the hallway, questioning why Alfred called his maid and feeling worried about what happened. Makina also admitted she was curious, so she would meet and talk to him directly. Charlotte understood, but before Makina really left, she brought up again the reason Alfred deliberately lost. The young man even tampered with his sword. She just didn't understand what sometimes went on in his head, why Alfred did things like that. Makina then said that this was for Lur, surprising Charlotte. Alfred himself chose to play the role of the cowardly and despicable third prince. By lowering his own position, he elevated Lur's position. But of course, regarding this incident, he also intended to portray Charlotte only as a victim trapped in his evil plan. However, with that intention, all the soldiers who didn't get the information, they would swear loyalty to Lur. Charlotte then remembered the soldiers supporting Lur. This wasn't new to her. Alfred always acted as Lur's shadow. Not just him. To make the royal family's light shine brighter, Alfred had maneuvered in the shadows, utilizing his bad reputation as the cursed child. The reason he sacrificed his entire well-being for that purpose was because his love for his family exceeded everything. For Alfred, what mattered wasn't the kingdom or its citizens, but the family that embraced him and gave blessings even though he was cursed. That's why he bore that burden for his family. Makina was sure Charlotte understood the reason for the end of her engagement. However, this arrangement wasn't personal, but a blood contract between the royal family and the noble family. Breaking it based on personal feelings would greatly endanger the royal family's credibility. If Alfred hadn't stormed in and caused all that confusion, Lur wouldn't have escaped the consequences. Because, publicly, Alfred bore most of the responsibility for that commotion. Charlotte really couldn't fathom their judgment that playing the villain and sacrificing himself was the method he considered best. She understood the importance of family, but still, in her opinion, there were better ways to handle things. Makina confirmed because that's how Alfred actually felt, but there was no other way. Charlotte still disagreed with her fiancé's decision. After both fell silent, Makina then turned while admitting she felt a bit more optimistic lately. Even Alfred's engagement to Charlotte was really beyond her expectations. So, maybe something would change. In fact, Makina wanted it to change. That was her optimism. Charlotte fell silent, unable to speak, until Makina informed that they had arrived in front of Alfred's room. Upon entering, Alfred immediately apologized for involving Charlotte in his problems. The girl herself didn't mind. However, Makina immediately praised her master, who had just given them a chance to get the collar key and prove that Charlotte was innocent. It was truly amazing, as expected from her master. Even so, the situation remained bad. Now Charlotte was already involved, making Alfred decide he must not lose. He was determined to do what he could. Alfred then stood up and told the 2 girls in front of him to get ready to leave. Makina asked their destination. Alfred said he hadn't taken care of everything yet, so he planned to meet Charlotte's parents. The 2 girls immediately jolted. Charlotte's own cheeks appeared flushed. Makina welcomed it happily because Charlotte would finally become Alfred's real fiancée. Alfred told them to hurry and get ready. During the journey, Makina kept smiling happily while repeating the sentence about Alfred finally getting a fiancé, making her master feel annoyed. Now that the young man had greeted Charlotte's parents, Makina felt their engagement seemed more official, even though it had indeed been official from the beginning. Upon arriving at the Mercenary estate, precisely at Charlotte's house, Alfred got out of the carriage first. Makina, who was helping Charlotte down, said that she caught Alfred putting on a cool attitude just for her. The servant asked them to wait in the living room while serving drinks. There were several purposes for Alfred coming here. Regarding the engagement, the discussion had been done between Alfred's and Charlotte's parents, but he personally wanted to convey greetings at the very end. And before the rumors about this absurd duel spread like fire, Alfred wanted to explain himself as well. Seeing his fiancée zoning out while drinking, Charlotte scolded him, but Makina asked her not to mind the young man. Besides that, Alfred had another main purpose. Even though Alfred had just arrived to introduce himself to his future in-laws, Duke Mervil Mercen, then greeted and apologized for making Alfred wait. He also apologized for not being present to welcome him in while bowing respectfully. Alfred in turn apologized because he came without an appointment, so he asked him to raise his head and begged them to just act normally. Mervil immediately laughed out loud, making Machina surprised. He then thanked him for the consideration of his future son-in-law. Alfred was also not someone who liked unnecessary formalities. Mervil had suspected it. As usual, none of them acted according to their respective positions. Charlotte then asked about the strangeness of her father, who seemed quite familiar with Alfred. The young man admitted that every time the atmosphere in the palace felt stuffy, Mervil usually protected him, and along the way, they started chatting. That happened without Charlotte's knowledge. There was a reason that Charlotte didn't know regarding considering Lure's position. Alfred asked to keep this matter secret between the two of them, but apparently they no longer needed to do that. Alfred seemed to have made up his mind to say this. His hands clenched tightly with a very serious expression. He said his visit today was to convey greetings, as Charlotte's fiancé. He also admitted he wanted to apologize. Mervil knew it wasn't just that Alfred wanted to say. He said he had heard about the duel. Mervil had sharp hearing, even though the duel agreement had only happened yesterday. If his future father-in-law already knew, then Alfred felt it made everything faster. As might be expected, today's meeting wasn't just small talk. Alfred then asked if he could meet the legendary jeweler. Charlotte didn't expect Alfred to ask about the jeweler, meaning the craftsman who made magic rings. In short, magic rings function as mana containers. Through these rings, they were first able to explore the realm of magic. The jeweler is someone who processes mana stones to make those rings. Isn't it an exaggeration to say that they laid the foundation that built society? The former palace jeweler from the royal workshop, commonly known as the legendary jeweler. It is said they suddenly disappeared, leaving everything in the hands of their disciples. Recently, they reappeared. Now, after communicating with the Mercen house, Alfred realized that negotiations were underway for their potential return to the workshop. Mervil also praised his future son-in-law, who was knowledgeable, even though this information was still limited to a select few, including His Majesty. He also saw Alfred had some very good subordinates under his command. Charlotte gaped, not understanding, while Machina hummed indifferently. Regarding those negotiations, Alfred asked Mervil's permission to handle them. The middle-aged burly man then asked the reason. Apparently, this was regarding Alfred's preparation to fight his brother, Lure. Even with the same type of magic ring, the craftsman's skill could make a significant difference. So the legendary jeweler's work was a treasure that Alfred couldn't ignore. Mervil judged his suggestion very similar to Alfred. He held his chin while confirming that indeed this matter was being handled by him, and they had the ability to change who led the negotiations. He then asked permission to speak honestly, that he couldn't place trust in Alfred. Charlotte immediately slammed the table because she was dissatisfied with that answer, making her father ask her to calm down. Charlotte then sat back down while huffing. Mervil revealed that his daughter had talent, born with silver mana. She had the talent to undertake the mission of supporting the royal family. Charlotte was his precious daughter, an irreplaceable treasure. They entrusted the girl because they had full trust in the royal family. However, his trust had been betrayed and Mervil couldn't hold back his doubts. His hands clenched tightly, full of anger. He had reflected on the meaning of his loyalty to this royal family. Regardless of everything that had happened, his daughter still had firm belief in Alfred. As a member of the royal family, Mervil asked how the young man would respond. Alfred said that at this time, no matter how he twisted his own words, it would be difficult for him to gain Mervil's trust. Also, he was the cursed child, and the words of a pathetic villain probably wouldn't affect Mervil. Mervil was surprised because Alfred seemed to give up, but apparently not. The young man grinned, then threw a shining ring taken from his suit pocket. It was the cross ring. Charlotte knew that this ring was an important treasure of the royal family. Alfred then asked them to consider it as the collar. Machina also panicked and protested because she never knew this information, but indeed Alfred never told anyone. Mervil himself still hadn't caught what the young man's plan in front of him actually was. Alfred said, if Mervil felt he betrayed Charlotte in any way, he invited his future father-in-law to do whatever he wanted with that magic ring. Especially since this was a magic ring made from high-quality magic stones with a spirit dwelling in it. He was sure Mervil would find many uses for it. The middle-aged man asked if he was lying because of greed for the cross ring. However, Alfred knew Mervil wouldn't do it, because he believed in his straightforward nature as Charlotte's father. Mervil was then willing to handle this ring with full responsibility. Anyway, without this ring, he worried Alfred couldn't fulfill royal duties. However, the young man asked him not to worry, because he still had another trump card. Mervil didn't expect his future son-in-law had also planned this. So, by taking over control from the Mercen family, he then wanted to ask Alfred to handle the negotiations with that legendary jeweler. The young man certainly welcomed it very readily. Once again, by order of Duke Mercen, who held the authority given to him by His Majesty the King, Alfred Berg-Leville, as the third prince, would act as the negotiator. The young man said it earnestly while standing, then sat back down in front of Mervil. Then they both laughed. All right, after finishing the formalities here, Mervil then entrusted Charlotte's care to Alfred. Also, he admitted he owed an apology, because he was testing the young man to prove whether Alfred could be trusted to protect his daughter. Alfred then sighed while leaning back on the sofa and admitted he also had that suspicion. Mervil was ready to accept all consequences. However, Alfred didn't need it. The undeniable truth was that Mervil had been betrayed by the royal family. The middle-aged man laughed, because he had expected Alfred to say that. The young man said Mervil was still as wicked as before. Alfred was then bombarded with the question of when he intended to start the negotiations. As much as possible, Alfred was determined to start it as soon as possible. He still needed to make some preparations, so it thyroid would be done tomorrow. If so, Mervil invited him to stay overnight at his place, along with his wide, friendly smile. Alfred could also avoid lure by staying here. The young man was very, very grateful to Duke Mercen, and he would happily accept the offer. Alfred would use the guest room here, while Charlotte had her own room. Mangacaped herself was busy eating the served treats. Alfred was worried they would be in danger if they stayed here. So because Charlotte couldn't use her magic now, he assigned Mangacaped to be his fiancée's companion tonight, just in case. The maid welcomed it enthusiastically. She invited Charlotte to have a girls' talk until morning. Alfred then reminded that Mangacaped might be annoying, but he asked his fiancée to be patient. Charlotte laughed and asked him not to worry, because she really enjoyed chatting with Mangacaped. Alfred also reminded that they would leave tomorrow morning, so the two girls had to rest well. Mangacaped might be a bit silly, but she was one of Alfred's most capable subordinates. He could be at ease knowing Mangacaped was with Charlotte, who was currently powerless. Anyway, Alfred begged for all things holy, not to say unnecessary things. His memory fell on the time Mangacaped showed that trashy book. The day grew darker. Mangacaped, who was already sitting on the sofa hugging a pillow, called Charlotte to invite her for a girls' talk, making the ducal daughter sit on the bed limply. Even though she might not be good at it, Charlotte promised to try her best, especially since she had always admired the tradition known as girls' talk. Charlotte had never really had close friends to share experiences with, so now she was really happy. However, as Alfred said, they had a long morning, so they shouldn't stay up late. She then decided to do it briefly and sleep early. Even though she didn't quite understand the meaning, she saw Mangacaped looking annoyed and grumbling. Mangacaped then invited to continue the conversation, and because Charlotte had just gotten engaged, they would start from the ducal daughter of Mercen. However, Charlotte didn't know what was good to say in this situation, but she wanted to ask. Mangacaped said she was ready to tell everything about Alfred's treasure collection, even where the young man hid it. Unfortunately, Charlotte was more curious about how the maid could meet Alfred, because it seemed Mangacaped had known him for quite a while. Mangacaped then realized she had never told her, but it wasn't a very funny story. Charlotte jumped and admitted it was just a silly question. She didn't mean to pry for information. Mangacaped instead laughed and apologized, because she must have been a bit vague there. Even though not funny, the incident wasn't a bad memory or anything. The girl herself was confused about explaining it, but simply, Alfred was the one who found her. Mangacaped couldn't remember anything from her past except her name. Her earliest memory was also birds chirping and flying above the building. The sound of her stomach growling and the smell of soil on the floor, where her frail body curled up. Mangacaped didn't know where to go and had no hope of surviving, but even so, she didn't want to give up on life. Every day was a struggle to survive. The little girl had to survive by stealing food and money. Charlotte apologized for reminding her of Makina's bad memories. However, the girl boasted that she was sneakier than she looked, so she was quite good at it. But one day, she made a mistake. Mangacaped accidentally got caught red-handed by the shop guard, and then they beat her hard. She admitted that it was indeed her fault for being a thief, but luckily she was still hungry. Even so, Charlotte couldn't accept it, because what they did to Makina was very cruel. Makina then brushed it off because if they had eaten her, the situation would have been worse. Food like that must be terrible for a girl. At that time, by chance, Alfred passed by and asked permission to buy a sack of sand while pointing to Makina's battered body sprawled out. Both the shop guard and Makina herself were immediately shocked. Without hesitation, he gave the shop guard a pile of gold coins and took Makina away. That was how Alfred got the girl. Thanks to that failure, the third prince who had a hobby of buying human sand sacks became the talk of the town. Alfred had bought a dirty orphan on the streets like that, assigned servants to bathe her with warm water, gave her food, clothes, and a bed, and then employed the girl as his maid. If others said something about Makina, Alfred explained that he brought the girl as his tool and told them to stop complaining about what he did with his personal belongings. Thanks to his view of Makina as a mere tool, in the royal palace, the girl changed from a ragged stranger to a pitiful child, whose essence was no longer human and was warmly embraced by the other servants. Charlotte was shocked because it reminded her of her suffering with Lure. When Alfred once again played the villain to protect Charlotte, it felt nostalgic. Makina took a lying position on the sofa, while Charlotte was touched because her fiancé always sacrificed himself for others. As his maid, this was already a big problem for Makina. She said Charlotte would also go through hard times. Charlotte then laughed hearing it. Makina considered her story sufficient. She then felt curious about Charlotte in return. Especially the most interesting part of girls' talk was undoubtedly romance issues. While peeking from behind the pillow with a teasing gaze, she asked Charlotte to honestly say her opinion about Alfred. Of course she was talking about interesting love, because now the two of them were already engaged. Usually, in political marriages, both parties continued the relationship without caring about their feelings, but considering Charlotte's last engagement ended badly, one might assume she would hesitate to trust another man. So, Makina was curious about the reason Charlotte decided to become Alfred's fiancée. Even though Makina also knew there were many circumstances that made this happen, but she wondered if perhaps Charlotte had considered Alfred as a man for some time. Charlotte thought for a moment before denying it and admitting she had never thought of it that way, finally regretting because Charlotte only considered Alfred as a friend. The ducal daughter then immediately explained in panic that her engagement to Lure had been arranged long ago. She herself always focused on proving her worthiness for the first prince. Charlotte saw it as a duty and never really considered romance. Even though she always admired love stories, where two people who love each other could be together. Feelings like that didn't fit her situation. Makina sighed because that statement was true. Considering Lure was the first prince, he was a true prince, and becoming his fiancée was the highest honor. She then got up from lying down again. Meanwhile, Alfred had nothing to do with the concept of political marriage, so he had the freedom to feel love. Makina laughed, while Charlotte looked dazed hearing it, then asked if there was someone the young man liked. However, instead of answering, Makina reasoned that they had chatted long enough and invited her to sleep now. Charlotte even begged not to avoid the topic. Makina firmly reminded that Alfred said they would wake up early too. Charlotte admitted she didn't mind staying a little longer. Out of curiosity, she even pressed Makina to speak. The maid then immediately hid under the blanket, making Charlotte scream cutely while pulling her blanket, because this was really unfair. Even though Makina was the one who invited her for girls' talk and said she couldn't fool her, Makina herself made sounds as if she was really asleep. Charlotte couldn't sleep like this. She sighed for Makina to properly answer her curiosity. She even shouted loudly asking who Alfred liked, so much so that the voice was heard in the living room, where Merville and Alfred were still chatting. As the night grew darker and Charlotte had fallen asleep, Makina woke up again, walked to the window, and stared at Alfred down there, who was sipping his drink. She called her master in a soft voice full of hope, her hands reaching for the glass as if touching that body. Merville recounted that the famous jeweler wanted a quiet life. Once he led a delegation of his men to visit, and he refused their meeting. It would be wiser to refrain from visiting him with any man and knights. So he felt worried it would be difficult to escort Alfred. Not that he had authority to lead the knight order from the start, but Alfred felt his own subordinates were more than enough as guards. Merville himself admitted that actually all of Alfred's subordinates were very capable. He then informed about Mount Idowal as the jeweler's residence, and the journey there wasn't too dangerous. The middle-aged man also apologized for worrying about his only daughter. Alfred himself felt it was natural for a father's worry about his daughter, but he would accompany Charlotte, so he asked Merville to just relax. The young man sipped his drink again, but when Merville mentioned the girls who must have slept by now, Alfred immediately sneezed in front of him. Merville thought the young man caught a cold, but Alfred denied it because he instead thought his idiot maid might be up to no good again. Merville asked him not to worry. Actually, he also wanted to say thank you. He was sure Charlotte would feel safer traveling with Alfred than with any guard. Alfred said he really appreciated his future father-in-law's kind words. Charlotte had no friends her age, so as a parent, Merville was very happy to have Machina as his daughter's friend. Alfred smiled hearing it. Alfred's gaze shifted to the window, where the night had begun to pass. Because he had to wake up earlier, he intended to bid farewell to sleep, but Merville just growled. He then asked if there was something his future father-in-law was thinking about. Apparently the tall, burly man was thinking about a father's feelings when marrying off his daughter, as he felt now. That made Alfred jolt. He who had sipped his drink couldn't swallow, until his drink flowed past his lips, then stammered apologizing. Merville then expressed his curiosity about a few things, making Alfred's gaze fixed on him with hands busy wiping his mouth. He imagined family must be something very precious to Alfred. So the young man fought Lure whom he respected, all to protect Charlotte. That was what tickled his curiosity. Alfred then stood up, walked to the window. Frankly, he admitted he didn't care about the fate of this kingdom, unlike Charlotte. His hands reached the glass, his gaze fell down, but his mind remembered his childhood wandering in an event. Little Alfred became the talk of everyone. They reminded each other not to get close to him. They were also surprised because the king didn't get rid of him sooner and considered the boy already crazy. They also whispered in horror, seeing his hair color. Lure then came shouting at everyone gossiping about his brother. He told them to convey their opinions directly to the king. He emphasized that Alfred was a true noble, and their behavior was treason against the crown, but still claimed to be proud citizens of the kingdom of Louisville. He then pulled Alfred away from the crowd, because associating with people like this would only tarnish his good name. Little Alfred stared at his hand pulled by Lure. In the past, his brother Lure was a king and an inspirational figure. He never cared about hair color, eyes, or magic. He just accepted Alfred. That was why Alfred loved him. Alfred clenched his hand that was previously touching the glass and admitted he didn't care what happened to the citizens. The only people he wanted to protect were the people he personally loved. And of course, Charlotte was among them. That was why he opposed Lure. Alfred turned back, looked at Merville, and said he would defend Charlotte because he believed in protecting those close to him. Merville repeated the young man's words who admitted only protecting the people he loved, but as a prince of this country, he felt that wouldn't be enough. Alfred sighed because he was never suited for it from the start. He then immediately laughed while scratching his head as soon as Merville confirmed his words. Anyway, Merville appreciated that Alfred didn't claim to do more than he could. The young man sipped his drink again. By the way, Merville smiled while asking what Alfred liked about his daughter, if the young man was willing to answer. Alfred sprayed his drink again hearing it. He was shocked because suddenly presented with such a question. Merville then defended himself that as a parent, it was natural for him to want to know that matter. He sipped his drink in between talking. Moreover, a marriage that was purely political between two nobles didn't need to involve any romantic feelings. So, Merville asked if Alfred had any complaints about Charlotte. The young man just stayed silent while wiping his mouth again. Because he didn't get an answer either, Merville finally threatened to oppose the royal family using the cross stone given by Alfred. The young man immediately begged not to consider a coup just because he was a loving father. Merville immediately laughed because he was just joking, while Alfred's body went limp and relieved at the same time. Alfred was more frank than he might realize, and Merville could see that he cared about his daughter. That was why he was curious, how Alfred could feel that way towards her. The young man said that Charlotte's dancing was very bad. It happened in childhood. Little Alfred called his brother in the palace and reminded that it was time to practice the dance that Lure would perform at the dance party. Lure then explained that his fiancée was still stumbling, so they needed to practice separately for now until reaching a level where they could dance together. It sounded quite troublesome, but Alfred wasn't involved in all that, so he could relax. Lure wouldn't say that, because maybe Alfred would need it someday. After that, Alfred continued in the garden swinging his sword, and now the day was afternoon. He then started feeling hungry. Regarding Lure's fiancée, He had seen her at parties, but hadn't talked to her. If reminded, Charlotte was the same age as him. He then jumped hearing someone's voice counting, then immediately peeked. Apparently Charlotte was practicing dancing. Her feet slipped and her body fell sprawled. Alfred hit again because of reflex when the little girl fell. Alfred realized it was his brother's fiancée. He guessed Charlotte had been practicing since morning until this afternoon. Even when walking, the girl fell again. It was hard to watch, but how many times had Charlotte fallen? Her wounds were covered and her dress was messy. Anyone would want to cry because of this. Alfred felt guilty saying it, but he wasn't good at that. If it were him, Alfred would cancel his dance. However, Charlotte never gave up. She kept practicing, fell, got up, and wiped tears. Alfred couldn't look away from Charlotte as she stepped awkwardly. There were many things Alfred had given up on. So, seeing Charlotte's persistent perseverance was truly inspiring. To him, the girl shone like a star. A beautiful light shining in the darkest night. He couldn't let her radiance fade. That was why on that party night, Alfred took action. So that's how it was. The young man had always cared about her since early age. Merville also asked Alfred to take care of his daughter. While in the room, when the two girls had fallen asleep, Charlotte was still questioning who Alfred liked in her sleep. Alfred was a bit hesitant because Mangacaped would go in a maid uniform. However, the girl didn't mind because it was a proud outfit given by her master. Charlotte chuckled softly, thinking the uniform looked adorable. Finally, Alfred chose not to make an issue of it since his fiancée didn't mind either. Upon arriving at Mount Itoil, the three of them immediately got off the carriage and saw a rope tied between two trees. So, the legendary jeweler lived somewhere out here. Charlotte poked the rope and felt like there was no barrier at all. Mangacaped commented that she had heard the villagers didn't allow outsiders to enter. Plus, they said terrifying monsters appeared around here. Alfred started thinking. The monsters could be a problem, and Charlotte's magic was still sealed. Maybe the three of them should wait here until there were guards. Charlotte decided to go too, because the reason they came here was Prince Lure, who had broken off the engagement with her. She realized she couldn't help much in fights, but the presence of someone from the Mercenary family might help with negotiations. Besides, as a future queen, she admitted she never slacked off in training. Mangacaped also decided to join, because it was safer than relying on random guards. She promised she would face any monster without breaking a sweat. After Alfred agreed, Mangacaped immediately pushed Charlotte's body to hurry up and go. Meanwhile, the young man sighed thinking about the terrifying monsters. Long ago, a disaster enveloped this world in darkness, caused by the Night Witch. One of the curses left by the witch upon her death was monsters called Ragment. Ordinary magic was useless against them. Only the royal family's power, ether, or the sixth element could defeat them. Without it, Ragment were invincible. Alfred hoped they wouldn't encounter such a thing. He easily used a ring to detect. Its waves scanned the surroundings far and wide. If any monster approached, they would have time to decide whether to run or stay put. Charlotte guessed it was a support-type ring, making Alfred turn around, then explain that it was search. As the girl might have thought, this tool scanned the surrounding area. He also showed the exchange and landmine rings. Charlotte was amazed, because Alfred had quite unique equipment. Mangacaped chuckled softly, while revealing that her master always wore the strangest rings, and called him a weirdo. She didn't even know whether to call him a bookworm or an otaku. Alfred, of course, didn't like being called weird until his ring detected something. He immediately told the two girls to hide. The two girls immediately panicked. A large creature with a furry hump, an extremely broad chest, and a small head that looked stitched on, then appeared. Mangacaped, who was already hiding behind the bushes with her master, commented that the creature looked more like a golem than a monster. Alfred himself had never seen such a creature before. Because he preferred to avoid fights, he suggested retreating before the creature noticed their presence. The golem's mouth opened, displaying fire magic, which made Charlotte gasp. Luckily, Alfred quickly realized it. He rushed to grab Charlotte before the attack exploded. Once stopped, the young man looked back. Usually, when using power on the body, the power was applied evenly throughout the body. But just now, to save Charlotte before the attack reached her, Alfred concentrated the power in his legs to maximize speed. He thought they had kept their distance, but the golem found their hiding place almost instantly. He was sure it must be a special type. Alfred hurriedly asked about Charlotte's condition. The girl stammered, admitting she was fine, and thanked him for protecting her. until she realized that Alfred's face was nestled in her chest. Mangacap immediately scolded, because this wasn't the time for romantic comedy scenes. She informed that the golem was heading towards her. Alfred quickly looked and admitted he didn't mean it like that. The golem launched another attack, making the young man entrust the supervision of his fiancée to Mangacap. Using another ring, Alfred created a barrier wall to hold the attack. The golem was smarter than he thought, so Alfred planned to defeat it. After nodding in understanding, Mangacap immediately pulled Charlotte to run away. However, the Mercen noble stopped for a moment. She realized that she was the only one who could use magic here. Mangacap looked back. She winked one eye while saying that her master was a bit shy, so even though he was too awkward to say it, she was sure Alfred would do anything to protect his fiancée. She begged Charlotte to let her master do that. Charlotte assured that she was fine, then begged Mangacap to go help Alfred. After glancing briefly, Mangacap looked forward again, because there was nothing to worry about regarding Alfred. Her master didn't need help to fight something like that. Charlotte was shocked to hear Mangacap say that. Meanwhile, at the battle site, Alfred kept dodging attacks, making the golem frustrated because it punched the ground, creating cracks, while Alfred floated above it. That power, no doubt about it. He knew the golem had magic rings attached to its body. To detect their presence, the creature used a search ring. The power behind those punches came from a power ring, and the fire magic from its mouth was a shoot ring. Maybe Alfred had never heard of creations involving rings like this. The golem swung its fist again, making Alfred immediately create a pointed wall that broke the creature's arm. Now it was his turn. He would concentrate power in his fist and embed shoot into it. His attack hit the golem, creating cracks in its body, until the creature fell powerless to the ground. Alfred truly met Mangacap's expectations, because it didn't take long to handle that. The young man looked and was surprised because they had returned in such a short time. Mangacap raised 2 fingers in a peace sign. She returned with the exchange ring, because she had mentioned it before. However, Alfred was still wary of the possibility of the golem rising again, until someone's loud sigh made them look. A foreign woman grabbed a ring lying on the ground. She thought they must be joking, because they really damaged that golem. Alfred apologized if they entered without permission. He also guessed that the woman was Eileen, the first court jeweler from the royal workshop. Charlotte was shocked because Alfred recognized her right away. The woman confirmed it, but she didn't know Alfred. The young man also introduced himself as the 3rd prince of this kingdom. Eileen chuckled softly while sighing, but she had to say, they all had become very strange lately. What kind of prince comes to the depths of these mountains alone? Alfred said the story was a bit long. Eileen massaged her head because she thought she could enjoy peace and quiet here, but Alfred broke in and destroyed her golem. Alfred chuckled softly while scratching his cheek and apologized for that. But Eileen also couldn't refuse the arrival of a prince. It wouldn't be polite to let Alfred stand here. She offered the young man to come to her cabin if he wanted. Alfred asked permission before entering Eileen's cabin, followed by Charlotte and Mangacap, who had just climbed the stairs. The owner told them to sit wherever they liked. However, Alfred was shocked to see the state of the room, which was very, very messy, to the point he didn't know where to sit. Eileen then pointed to something that could be used as a chair. Then she immediately asked the reason they came here. She guessed they would call her back to the royal workshop. Alfred confirmed that, then asked Mangacap to give the prepared scroll of paper. Mangacap then showed the paper containing the order from the Mercen house. Eileen immediately took and read it. Alfred heard from the Duke that the woman was difficult to deal with, but for now he felt he hadn't made any mistakes, except for the golem. After understanding the letter, well then, Eileen asked Alfred to tell the situation. Making the young man sigh in relief, Charlotte was also happy. Also, because Alfred defeated the golem easily, it clearly proved that he was not an ordinary prince. Finally, they explained everything to Eileen. How Alfred and Charlie finally got engaged after his brother Lure canceled the previous engagement, and he wanted to request a magic ring as preparation for the duel against his brother. So, that's how they ended up here. Alfred really begged for her help. If Eileen was interested, he could even provide the best facilities and adequate funding. However, the woman refused. After taking a shovel and opening the door, Eileen invited them to follow her. They walked through the forest. Alfred didn't know where Eileen actually wanted to take them, with that shovel too. The woman informed that they had arrived, once they reached a cave. She walked ahead without hesitation. Charlotte immediately followed her. while Alfred followed them from behind. He was annoyed because Eileen led them here, even without explaining anything, making him wonder more about the woman's plan. Charlotte was immediately amazed and told Alfred to look ahead. The three of them were stunned seeing the crystals filling the cave and very beautiful. These crystals, Alfred guessed as scorched stones. Makina felt those things were usually used in magic tools. Eileen explained that Alfred could collect high-level scorched stones here. Whenever she had free time, Eileen admitted she liked to drink here. However, Alfred was focused on the tombstone nearby. Eileen took a stone and wrapped it in cloth. Alfred was startled seeing a mana stone, while Charlotte was amazed again, because this was her first time seeing such a pure mana stone. Alfred couldn't even believe it. That type of mana stone wouldn't look strange, even in a cross ring. He wondered why Eileen kept all this in a grave instead of processing it into rings. The woman looked at them and could answer the curiosity regarding why she didn't make those stones into rings. She said that originally, long ago, these stones were humans. Charlotte guessed Eileen stored their data and considered them had turned into mana stones. There was no answer for a while. If Eileen remembered correctly, it must have been more than 200 years ago. At that time, Eileen's skill as a jeweler attracted the king's attention, and she was immediately appointed as the court jeweler. While fighting a demon wild boar, she fell from a cliff and couldn't move at all. The monster came approaching again, while Eileen had no energy left. Unable to gather strength, but didn't want to die here. The power ring was still on her finger. Suddenly a girl appeared and kicked the demon wild boar until it was knocked back. She squatted in front of Eileen and asked what she might be doing here, then guessed she was sunbathing. That's how Eileen first met Netos, the jeweler. By strengthening her body with power, Netos easily defeated the demon wild boar and quickly healed Eileen with recovery and made her stand upright again. When Netos learned that Eileen was also a jeweler, she invited her home. Her parents died when Netos was young, and she had lived alone on Mount Itoil since then. Since they both were jewelers, they immediately became close. However, when Eileen asked Netos to show her rings, this was the first time she truly felt defeated as a craftsman. Although her rings looked simple at first glance, the quality was extraordinary. Eileen could feel the extraordinary skill poured into them, almost approaching obsession. At that time, it was impossible for Eileen to approach Netos's level, she thought in her heart. Since then, Eileen started living with her. She had never had a rival before and didn't want to lose, so the woman thought she could learn Netos's secrets by being with her. But more importantly, Eileen had fun. Making rings, discussing each other's theories, hunting demons just to make more rings. Every day spent with Netos was a precious moment, and Eileen hoped it could last forever. Eileen tried not to think about the fact that as a human, Netos's life would end much faster before hers. That day it was raining. Even though it was already night, Netos was nowhere to be seen, even though she should have come home. So, Eileen came to the cave to look for her. And inside there, faintly illuminated by campfire stones, Netos lay. She immediately rushed to the body and asked about her condition. Even her eyes caught sparkling crystals emerging from Netos's hand. Eileen immediately confronted with questions about what happened, once Netos started to wake up, while the one asked reasoned that she fell asleep here. After sighing heavily, Netos felt there was no point in hiding it now. Netos told Eileen that she suffered from petrification. This was a disease that afflicted her bloodline, caused by the blessing of spirits. There was no cure. As the disease progressed, her body turned into stone, which eventually killed her. Her mother was like that too, when her body turned into stone and finally shattered into pieces. A beautiful magic stone emerged from her heart. Netos was sure the same would happen to her. She laughed while hoping that the stone from her heart was also beautiful, like her mother's sparkling golden stone. Eileen was angry hearing that despair. She was sure there must be a way to cure Netos. In the fairy village, or maybe in the royal capital. They would go there and find the cure. She promised to ask for help from the king. Netos then called Eileen softly while stroking her cheek. She admitted it was okay and all that didn't need to be done, because she already knew this would happen sooner or later. Netos decided since the day her mother died, the day she was left alone, she wanted to create something as proof of her existence, namely a masterpiece she could be proud of. Finally, Eileen brought Netos back to the hut in the heavy rain. There at her workbench, Netos started working diligently making a ring, even as her body continued to turn into stone. Eileen couldn't do anything but stand and watch as she worked. It could be said that she poured every last breath of her fading life into that ring, until Eileen finally realized it. Netos lived every day without knowing if it would be her last. She poured her entire soul into every ring she had. Deep in her heart, Eileen still thought that, as a long-lived fairy, she would eventually surpass Netos. That reality made her clench her fists and leave. Eileen questioned why she called herself the court jeweler. She realized it was just a bit of arrogance born from curiosity. No wonder she could never match Netos's brilliance. Since then, Eileen lost count of when the sun rose and set. She kept sitting and watching Netos working from behind, until the girl said that her work was finally done. Netos asked Eileen to look at her very sparkling and majestic ring. The magic stone Netos used for that magic ring was her mother's, so at least she wanted to make this ring with her own hands. She admitted she was very happy, because she finally managed to complete it. Netos gave the ring to Eileen, because it would be a shame if no one could use it. Also, the reason she gave it to the fairy was because Eileen was her precious friend. Netos hoped Eileen would listen to her as her last request. Finally, Eileen accepted and promised to keep it well. Although deep in her heart, she felt she shouldn't even deserve Netos's handmade ring. Also, one more thing as her other request. Eileen panicked seeing Netos's body almost entirely helping. However, in her last breath, Netos asked Eileen to use her magic stone, and make it into a ring. There was nothing Eileen could do, except agree to her request. Along with Netos's thank you, her body turned completely into stone in front of Eileen. So, that's the story from 200 years ago. Alfred had indeed heard that the magic stone in the cross ring came from someone's spirit, but didn't expect the possibility that it came from someone. After meeting Netos, Eileen thought she had fallen in love with a human. Human life is short, but they shine brighter than anything. The three humans were silent and couldn't say a word hearing Eileen's confession. As long as she remained a fairy, Eileen would never be like Netos. She had learned from her mistakes. She handed over the workshop to her apprentice and retired. So that's how it was. Eileen admitted she was just a stupid half-wit fraud, not a legendary jeweler. She couldn't help and told them to go home. Alfred began to understand the situation. He had been warned that Eileen would be suspicious, but the woman told everything about this place and her friend's story. She must trust them, and that's what made Alfred confused. He had no tricks, no influence to persuade her, none at all. They had no tricks or influence to persuade her, but Eileen's pride as a master craftsman prevented her from making rings. No words from Alfred would change Eileen's stance, making the young man flustered looking for another way. However, that's when Charlotte said firmly and steadily that they wouldn't go back. She told Eileen to make the ring, if the fairy truly respected Netos's will. Eileen stuck to her stance by saying she couldn't do it. Even so, Charlotte forced and said Eileen couldn't let that magic stone be buried in the ground. She told her to fulfill Netos's wish and move forward. Eileen retreated in silence until she uttered a sharp warning for Charlotte not to interfere in matters that weren't her business. She explained that there was no undo button in ring making. If wrong, the stone would be ruined forever. That was a risk that couldn't be taken at all, regardless of the other stones, but this one was her Netos. Eileen felt a selfish fraud like her didn't deserve to work with it. Charlotte called her and asserted that only Eileen could make the ring. The fairy had long thought about Netos's life. For 200 years forever, she had struggled. Charlotte herself couldn't even comprehend such an unimaginable span of time, but according to her, too much time spent just for one person. She assured that, even if Eileen failed to make that magic ring, the time spent wouldn't be in vain. Eileen accused her of just making small talk, making Charlotte ask why Netos entrusted her magic stone to the fairy. Instead of answering, Eileen turned around asking the meaning of that question. However, Charlotte knew that the reason was because Netos had always been by Eileen's side all this time. The fairy was speechless. Even though she was gone, her presence could continue to live in that plea. Netos, realizing her short lifespan, and could only do this to stay close to Eileen, who was eternal. Charlotte explained that Netos's wish wasn't for her gravestone to be buried forever. Even though it was scary, her legacy, her wish, now became Eileen's responsibility to uphold. Because only she could bring Netos's existence to the future. That's Eileen, only she could. Eileen gripped the stone in her hand tighter, because she felt scared. She had known that for a long time, but was too afraid to take over Netos's life. If she destroyed this stone, Netos would truly be gone. So Eileen kept running away from it. Charlotte then extended her hand and invited her to stop running. If she needed a reason to rise, Charlotte asked permission to be that reason. Besides, she left the decision to face it directly to Eileen. For someone who looked so gentle, Eileen sighed because Charlotte asked too much. The Mercen noble girl then laughed and admitted she could only do as much as she could. She also told that she was truly powerless now, because her magic power had been restricted, but Eileen was still capable. The fairy didn't budge, then her gaze shifted to the mana stone in her hand. Although it was very troublesome, but in the end she agreed to work with them. Alfred was very grateful for that decision. Eileen said it was okay, and they could relax now. She invited them to leave the past, and she would return to the palace. She would indeed cooperate, but also ask them not to misunderstand, because the only person she served was Charlotte. Once pointed at, Charlotte was confused. She even looked at Alfred and asked the reason. The young man himself didn't understand, while Makina looked amazed seeing it. Eileen mentioned that she needed to prepare something, so Alfred and the others decided to go home to the capital first. In the slowly moving carriage, the young man leaned back tiredly, especially since he thought they had to give up on the ring for the second time. Makina confirmed that her master almost failed this time. Alfred admitted he didn't have time to do adequate research on Eileen, and of course, without Charlotte their efforts would be in vain. Charlotte, whose name was mentioned, then apologized for suddenly speaking like that. Alfred himself didn't know why his fiancée apologized. Honestly, he couldn't possibly scold Eileen so firmly to awaken her. In the middle of the conversation, suddenly the carriage shook quite hard. Whatever had happened, but Makina hurried down to check it. Once the door closed and Alfred didn't move, Charlotte looked panicked, asking what might have happened. She even worried about Makina's condition. The young man's eyes couldn't stay still. He moved looking at Charlotte, especially when realizing that now they were alone in a private room. Charlotte started to notice that anxiety. Instinctively, Alfred hurriedly averted his gaze, making the atmosphere silent. When called, he only cleared his throat as an answer while continuing to calm himself. Charlotte then asked about his condition, while making sure if she did something that offended his feelings. Alfred denied, but the girl knew her fiancé was lying, especially the sweat flooding his face and continuing to avoid eye contact. Because Alfred had to avoid, making Charlotte move to sit beside him, because if she was here, then there was no place for him to run. Alfred glanced at his fiancé's chest, even ignoring the girl's call, and Charlotte's face was very close, until something that smelled nice started to be smelled. Charlotte accused Alfred of still planning to ignore her. Alfred kept denying, so Charlotte pressed him by asking why the young man didn't look at her directly. Alfred's body felt weak, his chest pumped to keep breathing because it felt stuffy. He admitted he was nervous. This was the first time Alfred was engaged, and he indeed didn't know how to talk to women. Also, being in a small room like this, just the two of them. Charlotte, who was initially stunned, then started laughing, making Alfred ask her to stop. Charlotte apologized because she didn't mean to mock. Her cheeks blushed as she approached Alfred, making the young man even hotter. Charlotte whispered that she felt Alfred was very cute. In the midst of a very thrilling situation, Makina opened the door suddenly while shouting that the situation was an emergency, making the two lovebirds look shocked with flushed faces. She meant she was also shocked seeing their expressions and apologized in case she disturbed something. Alfred shouted, saying there was no such incident. Charlotte also confirmed it. The three of them got out. They had been surrounded by people in black robes. Charlotte screamed in panic because there was no place to escape. Alfred immediately asked about those people's business. One of the robed people approached, making Charlotte tell her fiancé to be careful. Once Alfred looked, at the same time, Charlotte launched a high kick, namely the Mercen-style martial arts taught by Merville, right to the hooded person's face. Alfred and Makina were both shocked, especially Charlotte's high heel damaged the mask. Charlotte screamed, apologizing while bowing, while admitting she had no idea that they all worked for Alfred. Makina explained that more precisely, they were called shadows. This unit reported directly to Alfred. They handled various tasks, but their main role involved carrying out secret missions under Alfred's orders. She also admitted that she was their leader. Charlotte immediately looked shocked. She never imagined that Makina was the one leading them. Makina confirmed it, although she didn't look like part of them. But believe it or not, she was Alfred's right hand. And just for information, Makina had worked with Alfred longer than anyone. That fact again made Charlotte bow respectfully while apologizing. Alfred said the girl didn't need to worry, because they were the ones who misled. Mangacaped raised 2 fingers in a peace sign and said that actually, they were here to inform about a Ragment sighting. Alfred immediately asked about the current situation. The robed people immediately knelt. One of them asked permission to report. In the palace courtyard, the soldiers fell scattered. The knight captain from the Livil Kingdom, Graskian Ganel, ordered his troops to stay focused to slow them down with magic. One soldier reported that this was not good, because whatever they tried, the thing didn't move at all. So, they were ordered to create distance and keep hitting the ball. The knight captain realized without the cross ring, Ragment couldn't be defeated. He cursed, because of all times, the creature came when all royal family members were away. The soldiers themselves remained standing bravely with shields and weapons, holding back the giant monster's attack. Without news from Prince Lure, one soldier suggested asking for help from other kingdoms. However, Graskian said that wasn't an option, because the first princess, second princess, and second prince were currently in other countries. They then debated because the only one left was the third prince, while others felt that such a prince couldn't provide help. Graskian told them to be quiet. He said that Alfred was also someone they must serve as the royal family. Suddenly, without realizing, a fist flew towards him and made him thrown, so the soldiers screamed. They reported that at this speed, everyone would be annihilated, then begged the captain to give the order to retreat. Graskian then rose and warned not to waver. If they didn't stop Ragment here, then this would bring disaster to society. Ragment then released fire magic from its mouth and burned the soldiers, making them scramble in heat. Even the captain didn't expect it, especially when Ragment's foot flew to step on him. Such power. Unimaginable that the knights would end up in such a state. Right at the last seconds, Alfred came and launched a fireball attack to shoot Ragment and save Graskian. The monster raged because its head was on fire. Once Alfred landed, he called the knight captain and told him to take the living knights and retreat, because he was the only one who would stop the creature. The third prince of the Livil Kingdom, Alfred Berg Livil, the only heir to the royal bloodline currently here who could oppose said Ragment and the bearer of the cross ring. He told Graskian to take the knights to retreat, then told his black-robed people to take the injured victims to a safe place. Graskian asked why Alfred came here and those black-robed people. Alfred then informed that the robed people were his subordinates. On the way home from Mount Idowal, he got a report that the knight captain was fighting a Ragment. He said that Graskian had done well holding out this long. Now Alfred would handle everything from here. The captain agreed. Alfred immediately used the skull ring biting the crystal, and explosions hit the ground. Mangacaped and Charlotte even gasped. Mangacaped told Charlotte to see that it was a spirit summoning residing in the cross ring held by the royal family. This was the highest level of magic, empowering the user by channeling the spirit's power and embedding it into their body. That was one of the spirits possessing Alfred, and its name was Awilda. The female spirit then advanced and pummeled the Ragment, making the knights gape because this worked. Awilda was a closed-off spirit, not like what could be expected from a noble, but according to Mangacaped, it was still very cool. Now Awilda reached Alfred's body, which had lost consciousness, and possessed it. His appearance changed. Alfred wore Awilda's cowboy hat, held her sword, and used her boots. He was pitch black mana, the sixth element, or Erebos, intertwined with spirit energy into a magical armor called Spirit Robe. So that was Alfred's true power. Ragment released fire magic again, making Graskian ask his master to be careful. Receiving the attack, Alfred just stood still waiting. Once the fire fragments approached, his sword moved very fast, splitting them. The speed couldn't be estimated, but more importantly, the swordsmanship made Graskian even more fixated. Those movements had almost no form or structure, yet undeniably those movements had been battle-tested. Even more surprising was Alfred protecting the knights from stray bullets. He wasn't sure that it was really Alfred, the third prince, even though everyone thought he was a cheat and untalented. Alfred looked too comfortable fighting the creature. Graskian even wondered how many battles the young man had actually been through. Alfred then shouted, telling people to do their duties. Instantly fire, water, earth, and air binders were launched to bind the Ragment. Now, the final part, he launched a wild cannon to annihilate the creature. A big explosion thundered, making the knights speechless except staring in awe. Once the battle was over, Alfred returned to his original appearance. All of Awilda's accessories vanished into puffs of smoke along with her disappearing spirit. He felt that was enough. Charlotte thought Alfred had experienced a series of intense battles with Ragment. Machina confirmed it. The young man was always the first to track and exterminate them. Come to think of it, Graskian had indeed seen strange reports before, where he got news that a Ragment had been found, but when they arrived at the suspected location, there was no trace at all. However, Charlotte thought the cross ring should be with her father. Machina explained that the ring was actually Alfred's as well. Normally, a person could only make a contract with one spirit, and the ring served as proof of that contract. However, Alfred made contracts with two spirits at once. Charlotte was shocked and asked how that could happen. She had never heard of such a thing. As far as Machina knew, this was an unprecedented case. Charlotte's gaze then glanced at Alfred, who sighed while rubbing his nape. While hiding your extraordinary talent, she couldn't imagine how many wounds Alfred had suffered without anyone knowing. The soldiers doubted whether that was really the third prince, because they never knew that the young man was so strong. They had only heard rumors, leading to the presumption that it seemed like baseless gossip all this time. Alfred was actually quite impressive. Machina just smiled hearing their words. Alfred then called Graskian and asked if he knew about the issue involving that legendary jeweler. Apparently, the knight captain only knew that Duke Mersenne was the negotiator. Alfred informed that the negotiation was successfully resolved by Charlotte. Eileen would return to the court workshop, and the knights would be given magic rings in due time. The soldiers couldn't believe the jeweler would return. They thought Eileen had been missing for 200 years, but apparently the woman had been found. Finally, they would have some decent equipment. Maybe he was actually quite capable, and they started seeing him from a different perspective. Alfred smiled happily seeing that enthusiastic reaction, until a soldier stopped the euphoria. First of all, he blamed Charlotte for all this. He accused the Mersenne noble girl of chasing after that commoner. Because of her actions, the first unit had to be reassigned back to Lucille's head guard, and that left them short on personnel. They were almost annihilated because of that. Another soldier confirmed it. The angry glares intensified. More soldiers blamed Charlotte. They didn't care about the girl acting as if she had saved the day. They also blamed her for the deaths of their brothers who were now scattered on the ground. They were angry and drove her away, even throwing stones. However, Alfred quickly blocked it, so the stone hit his forehead. The soldier who threw it was shocked. Charlotte was worried because her fiancé's forehead was bleeding, but Alfred told her not to worry and said it was just a small scratch. Alfred turned back to the soldiers. With a cold grin, he said that those soldiers weren't very useful, making them upset. They couldn't even slow down the monster. All Alfred heard were excuses and blaming Charlotte, or the fact that their best troops weren't here. He said weak people like them should know their place, then told them to shut up and do as ordered. They weren't more useful to Alfred than dead people, like the corpses lying there. They immediately got furious, but Graskian quickly stopped it and told them to get back to work cleaning up and returning everyone to their posts. They grumbled and hurried back, leaving Machina, Alfred, and Charlotte. Charlotte pulled Alfred's shirt from the back, making Alfred tell her not to worry about it. The knights without ether never had a chance against it. There was no victory for them against that Ragment. They had their own pride as royal knights, so they had to divert the blame elsewhere. But that didn't justify turning against and throwing stones at Charlotte. Charlotte's voice was very weak when saying that Alfred should have let the stone hit her. Rain started falling, soaking both of them. She kept forcing Alfred to be the villain every time. When the engagement failed, when running away, and now here. Charlotte hid behind him, pretending to be helpless. She felt like just a coward. Finally, Alfred looked back. He had said that it didn't bother him. That's just how it was. Charlotte still demanded a reason, making Alfred turn and grip her hand. If it didn't bother him, Charlotte was still curious why Alfred put on such a lonely expression. The young man invited his fiancée to return to the carriage, because if it continued like this, Charlotte would catch a cold. He then pulled the girl's hand towards the carriage. In the Louisville Royal Palace, Eileen greeted and said that now she would be under Charlotte's supervision. Meanwhile, Alfred felt horrified seeing her personality change so drastically. He couldn't believe the woman in front of him was the same person who refused to return to the palace for centuries. Charlotte, who had been silent all this time, finally made small talk because Eileen had arrived here and was glad to meet her again. Eileen gripped the girl's hands enthusiastically, because she was also very happy to meet Charlotte again. The Mercen noble girl informed that Eileen didn't need to stand and chat like this, because Machina had prepared a place for her, so she invited her to rest. However, the fairy refused the formal attitude. She was a guest here, and everything was taken care of. Besides, this wouldn't tire her. Eileen admitted she didn't mind standing longer to talk with Charlotte. Moreover, she owed her for reminding her of something important. Eileen then called Alfred as Lord Prince. She laughed while warning if Alfred made Charlotte cry, then the young man wouldn't get away with it. However, only silence answered the warning. That reminded Alfred of the previous incident. Eileen, feeling offended, asked about that strange pause. Meanwhile, Charlotte chose to run away and said she would go to help Machina. Alfred turned to chase, but Eileen's hand held his shoulder first. She kept pressing with questions about what he did to Charlotte. She warned Alfred to tell everything. However, it would be counterproductive if he leaked the details indiscriminately. Although reluctantly, Alfred told Eileen about the quarrel with the knights after the battle against the Ragment. Until finally, Eileen threw a punch to Alfred's face while calling him stupid, then turned away. The young man didn't understand why he got this punch. Eileen then faced him again angrily. She repeated her warning. If for any reason Alfred made Charlotte cry again, then she would beat the young man thoroughly. Alfred, still hiding behind his hands, asked about the problem, because in the end, he managed to protect Charlotte. Eileen sighed, massaged her head, and said she couldn't stand naughty children. Her finger pointed sharply at Alfred's face, and said that the young man couldn't think that his view of the world was the only important one. Alfred couldn't see other people's hearts. That's why he acted without thinking of the consequences. If the young man truly thought about Charlotte's heart, Eileen felt Alfred would never do that. With Eileen's index finger still in front of his face, Alfred really didn't understand what the fairy actually wanted to convey with the reason of Charlotte's heart. Eileen explained that Charlotte faced Netas's heart. That's why the Mercen noble girl was able to say words that made her realize what was really important. Charlotte could do this because she regretted not facing the first prince's heart. Alfred was shocked to hear that. Even until now, Charlotte was still struggling. She tried to understand Alfred's heart. Eileen challenged Alfred to say honestly that he tried to do the same with hers. Alfred clenched his fists tightly. He admitted that all this time Charlotte had approached him, tried to understand him, tried to communicate. But it was he who kept his distance to truly approach Charlotte. Before Alfred finished confessing, they looked when realizing Charlotte's presence, who just stood frozen in place. Alfred called and approached, but the girl was busy explaining that Machina told her to call them both, and she didn't mean to eavesdrop or anything. Once again Alfred called. Once he reached her, he invited to go on a date, making Charlotte freeze again. Her cheeks flushed red, then she screamed in shock. A few days later in the afternoon, at Claudia Church, Charlotte held Alfred's hand very tightly as the young man led her out of the tower window towards the roof. She, who was already very scared, asked if her fiancé wasn't afraid at all walking on the roof of the church dedicated to the great saint who once fought the Night Witch. Of course, no ordinary person dared to do that. Alfred helped her sit on the tile and admitted unfortunately he wasn't a good boy. After successfully sitting, Charlotte said if so, she would be a naughty girl in front of him, making Alfred immediately glance at her. However, she had to admit that this was surprising, because she never thought the young man was the type who would take her to church. Charlotte wasn't wrong. Honestly, Alfred really hated this place, to the point he climbed here just to vent his frustration, because he had been given this power. Charlotte herself knew that it was indeed like Alfred's habit to say that. Alfred told her to forget about that now, then pointed to the end of the sunset, where the sun prepared to return to its rest and emitted golden rays. Charlotte was amazed by its beauty. This was a special place for Alfred. He came here whenever he wanted. His hand gripped tightly, then apologized to his fiancée. Charlotte didn't know why the young man apologized, because in fact, it was she who always relied on Alfred and kept giving reasons to worry. However, admitting that he had run away from the girl's heart. The confession made Charlotte stunned. The story was a bit long, but Alfred hoped Charlotte would listen. The girl agreed without hesitation. Because of the cursed mana Alfred had since birth, people called him cruel names, like the royal family's disgrace and cursed child. Their words pierced, and little Alfred often cried. The world felt very unfair, and sometimes he felt resentful towards his parents for bringing him into it. Lure tried his best to comfort, but his kindness couldn't erase all the pain. If he couldn't be like the heroes in picture books, maybe he was destined to be a villain, he thought. After that, daily life became very easy. After all, villains were destined to be hated and avoided. So, no need to feel hurt. There were people like Charlotte who tried to reach out and offer kindness, but Alfred pushed them all away. Because if he let Charlotte in, then he couldn't live as the villain he had decided to play. Honestly, what had always been Alfred's greatest fear was revealing his true self behind the villain's mask. Even though he knew from the start that sacrificing himself like this wouldn't bring happiness to Charlotte. But in the end, Alfred wasn't trying to protect the girl. He was just trying to protect his own vulnerability. Hiding behind twisted logic, Alfred was always nothing more than a pathetic person. Suddenly Charlotte hugged him, making Alfred freeze. Once realizing the very close distance, he screamed while trying to free himself. Charlotte also screamed, telling him to be careful here. However, then he saw the girl crying and asking him. Charlotte called him, making the young man hold her shaking shoulder. Alfred had harbored this pain all this time, and she never realized it. Even though she thought she understood everything about the young man, but all this time, she had only made assumptions. Charlotte couldn't forgive herself for being such an insensitive and clueless fool. She kept crying while blaming herself, making Alfred panic more and asking her to stop crying. His hands moved to frame Charlotte's face. Alfred admitted that he wasn't the type of person Charlotte thought, and he admired the girl. Her graceful aura, her honesty, and everything about her. Charlotte shone so brightly that Alfred couldn't help but envy her. Charlotte held both of Alfred's wrists so the grip on her cheeks released, and said that the young man completely misunderstood. She admitted she was no different from Alfred in protecting her own heart. She always lived according to her role, as the first prince's fiancée. When Prince Lure once belittled her dreams, Charlotte left all her dreams and locked them tightly, convincing herself that she had to be an obedient fiancée, as expected. He might not even remember it, but Charlotte immediately ran away because it occurred to her to comfort him. Because, like others, she didn't want to get hurt. She then asked who exactly Alfred wanted to be. The young man started thinking about it. Like the heroes in the picture books he read as a child, strong and calm, and loved by everyone. Alfred clenched his fists and said he wanted to be a king like that. Of course, what he wanted to achieve wasn't becoming a villain. Charlotte repeated Alfred's words to her when she was little when returning her book, that the chance was never zero. However, if never trying, there would be no change at all. Those were the words of the main character they admired. Before giving up, Charlotte offered to try first. Like what Alfred said to her years ago. Charlotte placed her hand on the back of Alfred's hand while admitting she didn't have the courage to oppose those things and ended up failing. She didn't want Alfred to make the same mistake as her. Actually, she wouldn't allow it because the young man wasn't alone anymore. Charlotte gave her best smile. Now she framed Alfred's face. Even though she wasn't strong enough to protect the young man, but they could face this pain together and rise again, side by side. Charlotte then hugged him. Alfred, who had been silent all this time, finally hugged back while saying thank you. The day of the duel, at the Academy Arena. The spectators had filled the seats around the match venue. Alfred muttered because it seemed his father couldn't come at the end of the event. Makina guessed that he seemed busy handling that large fragment because he was the only one available. Alfred looked at the rings made by Eileen for today in his hand. There was no time to practice with them, but just by touching them, he could feel the difference from ordinary rings on the market. As expected from Eileen, she truly deserved her name as a legend. Charlotte then called, her breath panting while grateful for arriving on time. She conveyed her purpose was her father's order to return the ring. Alfred immediately took it back. Before Charlotte left, he asked her to stay here to watch the duel. The girl of course agreed, because she came with that intention. Alfred informed that he had never seriously fought with his brother. They actually never really talked heart to heart, because Lure was always his idol. So he couldn't win alone. Charlotte immediately grabbed Alfred's hand and gripped it. She informed that her fiancé wasn't alone anymore, because she would be by his side. Alfred was stunned, then thanked and turned away to the duel field steadily. If so, he decided he would return. Since childhood, Lure was always admired and respected. Everyone immediately saw him as His Highness the First Prince Lure. They believed His Majesty the King must be very proud of him because he was truly an extraordinary prodigy. They felt amazed and believed the kingdom's future would be safe in his hands. They were also very grateful for his birth. As the first prince and heir to the Luvil kingdom, the burden of becoming king was placed on Lur's shoulders. Therefore, he had to become stronger. He had to become a ruler worthy of the throne. However, Lur never truly believed that he deserved the throne. The referee invited all spectators to witness this duel. He introduced His Highness, the first Prince Lurberg Luvil, who was highly relied upon by everyone as the future king. He was sure Lur could beat his brother thoroughly. And in front of him, His Highness, the third Prince Alfred Berg Luvil. Both fighters were invited to advance to the arena. The duel would end only when one side declared surrender or was deemed unable to continue. Alfred looked at his brother standing in front, his gaze sharp and his hand gripping. He called him in his heart. So, finally Lur could see that his brother had made up his mind. Alfred admitted he was done running away and had made his choice. Lur's index finger pointed at him. He said he wouldn't prepare to face judgment for his sins. The referee immediately announced that the match would start soon. Alfred put on his ring and affirmed if he won, he would order his brother to remove that necklace from Charlotte. Lur did the same. He didn't mind, and in return, he would ensure Alfred faced justice. Once his ring was on, Lur quickly attacked with Spiral. It was a rare mid-level king. Controlling one was already difficult, but he managed to control 6. His talent was undeniable. Charlotte was already panicking and felt Alfred would lose. However, Alfred countered with fireball shots, making Machina smile happily. He defended by releasing 6 consecutive fireballs. Lur knew the ring wasn't just an ordinary ring, and could predict that this was the work of the legendary jeweler. Alfred confirmed it, because he had resolved not to lose. If so, without holding back, Lur would crush his brother with absolute power. He called Regulus, the lion spirit, and let its roar shake the sky. The spectators cheered seeing Lur pull out the cross ring and exert full ability. Seeing his brother, who had stopped holding back, then Alfred wouldn't hold back either. So he called a Wilda. He wouldn't retreat anymore. Lur would ensure his brother paid for what he did to Lucille. Both moved forward to attack each other. Alfred firmly held a Wilda's sword and was ready to slash it. Machina was shocked seeing he would do an all-out frontal attack. Charlotte was worried because Alfred's mana wouldn't last. Machina confirmed it. Alfred's Erebos had poor odds against Prince Lur's Ether. Once slashing his sword, Lur said he wouldn't forgive anyone who dared hurt Lucille. Alfred held his brother's grip. He apologized and honestly said that damn woman never entered his list of concerns. Lur immediately fell silent seeing the gun muzzle aimed at him. Then Alfred quickly shot him with a fireball. Supporters from both sides were shocked. Alfred still stood in place when the warning voice for daring to be disrespectful to Lucille. Lur slammed his sword while calling him stupid, while Alfred could only dodge. As Alfred suspected that it was just bait, Lur increased his speed with acceleration. If his brother was willing to go this far to defend his girlfriend, he thought maybe Lur should try trusting his fiancée first. Lur told him to shut up while preparing, seeing Alfred jump into the air while aiming the gun. Before his brother could shoot, Lur had already tied an earth chain from his hand to his brother. Alfred himself remained calm because he had gotten one of his brother's arms. Lur said Alfred couldn't hold him with this, and emphasized not to underestimate him. Regulus's heart created strong waves and very blinding light. This extraordinary mana made Alfred feel choked. Lur shouted, making Alfred startled, until his body was thrown into the air. The power beyond common sense. Alfred, who was still floating, guessed with the possibility. It was magic that briefly boosted everything. Lur told Alfred to get out of his sight, because he was a worthless disgrace. Then Regulus's roar was deafening, and its waves had strong destructive power. Alfred couldn't dodge like this. He created an earth wall to hold it. However, his wall couldn't hold longer and would soon break. The wall broke and Alfred's body tumbled backward. Charlotte called him. She was very anxious and could only cover her mouth, worried seeing her fiancé fall very hard until dust rolled around him. Alfred forced his limp body to rise again. Lur made sure his brother could still stand tall. Alfred said he could still with panting breath, because if he fell here, he couldn't catch up to his brother. He said honestly that Lur used to be everything he wanted to achieve. Alfred leaned on his legs and arms, his weak body forced to rise even though shaking violently. He admitted wanting to be just like Lur, but because he was a cursed child, he ran away and became a villain instead. However, by doing that, Alfred only hid what he really felt all this time. It was Charlotte who finally made him see the truth. Alfred decided not to run anymore and urged Lure to explain his reason. What made Lure hate them so much that he would drive away his own family just to protect an ordinary girl? Lure used to be his hero, but how could he betray them like that? Lure walked in front of his brother. He repeated Alfred's words, admiring and considering him a hero, and slapped him hard. Alfred was thrown again. Lure's supporters cheered, welcoming Alfred's defeat. Mangacap still watched, but Charlotte was already very anxious. Alfred was truly powerless. Lure told him not to overdo the joke, because Alfred and Charlotte didn't know anything. Alfred still called his brother, but no response. Meanwhile, in one corner, Lucille looked at them with a sly smile. She was happy because these fools really didn't know anything. The first princess, Rush, my twin sister Lure. The second prince, Robert. The third princess, Sophie. All his siblings shone with talent, while Lure himself was very ordinary. In the royal family, Lure was the only one who was very ordinary, and now he was here, soon to be king, without his own true talent. Lucille asked about the cursed third prince. Lure admitted that his younger brother, Alfred, was his only savior. He was only 12 when he made a contract with a spirit. Little Lure cheered for his success. No noble had ever succeeded in making a contract with a spirit at this age. He was very excited. With what was called this talent, Lure vowed to protect his unfortunate brother. That was an unshakable determination. Until then, Lure walked around the training area and saw Alfred undergoing training. The trainers were very amazed because Alfred could make contracts with 2 spirits at once. This was a historic event. They said Lure's record was shattered just like that. Lure was very shocked hearing their words. In a family full of genius children, Alfred was never the different one. It was Lure who always seemed different from them. Lucille knew it must be very hard for Lure. Even though the young man worked harder than anyone. Not only giving comfort, the girl also hugged him warmly. Lure felt the only person who ever noticed him was Lucille. Still at the match venue, Alfred called his brother and asked what he meant. Lure never knew how much he idolized him. However, Lure said Alfred would never understand. He recently mentioned every cursed family member. He hated the way they showed off talent, obtained without effort, while he kept pondering his own inadequacy. Lure truly hated them all. He would become king. The burden of the royal bloodline, the kingdom's future, the people's lives, all rested on his shoulders. He was afraid if the people knew that behind the crown was nothing more than an ordinary human. That was something very frightening. He was sure Alfred didn't know how scary it was, especially with all his talent. With his short breaths, Alfred apologized for keeping his eyes closed and not realizing that Lure was suffering. Even so, Lure was the person he admired as his hero. Seeing his back always standing tall gave Alfred courage. So, he begged Lure not to turn away from his own heart. In it contained more than just envy and anger. There was still light that saved Alfred. Lure still told him to shut up while swinging his sword again and slashing it at his brother. Charlotte closed her eyes and prayed earnestly, while the spectators tensed up. Alfred's cross ring shone. He managed to hold Lure's attack and counter with Ser9, the announcement sword in his right hand. His supporters panicked and cursed Alfred for still being able to attack, especially seeing Lure's reaction. Alfred's second spirit rose, that was Arsene. Lure himself just saw his brother's second spirit robe. Alfred said this was the hardest challenge of all, namely facing not only other people's hearts, but also Lure's own heart. However, denying one's identity was unmatched torture. He wouldn't run anymore, he would face both, namely his own heart and his brother's heart. Until now, Alfred did nothing but run. He wanted to end this here. Until now, he used Perenna, the receiver's sword in his left hand. Then his body shone brightly when using Steel Regulus's heart magic. Lure panicked and asked how Alfred could use Regulus's heart. Charlotte couldn't believe her fiancé had stolen Lure's talent. Mangacap explained that the ability of Alfred's 2 swords, namely Ser9 and Perenna, was to steal the opponent's magic when he slashed them. The very tremendous wave made Lure retreat. His shoes slid on the ground, creating tracks. Alfred couldn't use the stolen magic with Reaving Cut, but now after taking Regulus's heart from Lure, this was his chance. The very blinding light closed everyone's view from both fighters in the arena. Everyone waited anxiously. The light disappeared, and the dust rolling around them began to fade. Nothing happened, but in the middle of the arena, Lure knelt weakly and Alfred stood firmly in front of him. Mangacap shouted that his spirit robe faded, and meant her master one. Alfred called his brother, who was stunned. Suddenly Lucille was beside Lure and cut his hand, because in conclusion the young man had lost. Alfred froze, seeing blood spurting, but couldn't do anything. Mangacap and Charlotte, too, both hurried down from the spectator seats, chasing them. While Lucille took the ring from Lure's hand and threw his hand carelessly, while the owner tumbled to the ground. Lucille raised the ring with sparkling eyes, because she finally got what she had been looking for all this time. Alfred chased his brother's fat body, helped by Mangacap, while Charlotte still looked shocked. She screamed, asking what Lucille had done. The spectators were still wondering what had just happened. They still couldn't believe the incident when Lucille cut Lure's hand. Mangacap tried to help stop the bleeding. Alfred cursed because his brother lost a lot of blood and didn't know what to do. Mangacap promised to save him and asked her master to stay calm. Charlotte, who was still panicking, then suggested that in front of her was Lucille, protected by Lure. Although quite troublesome. Who would have thought Lure only had a little chance? But still, Lucille was happy because she finally got what she wanted. She quickly put on her ring. Charlotte screamed, asking if that was the only reason Lucille approached Lure. The girl glanced at her with the corner of her eye and asked Charlotte not to say that, because the ring was a precious treasure only given to the royal family, and Lucille had to go through a lot to get it. Especially, having to pretend to date the pathetic and untalented prince. Lucille said that while licking her ring. Alfred wanted to make sure that the girl had tricked his brother or used magic to control his mind. Lucille said that wasn't true. If using that method, there would be no fun in it. She admitted only telling Lure exactly what the young man wanted to hear and said she was quite skilled in that. Or at least it only meant Lucille had watched him. Much closer than anyone. Alfred was furious, especially the girl gave a mocking posture. His inner thoughts were truly extraordinary, envy towards his family, and his complexity for feeling less talented. Lucille laughed. It only took a little push to make him under control. Being able to witness all that up close, truly exhilarating. Besides, Lucille also enjoyed life in boarding school. Very happy days. She bloomed reminiscing all that. However, Alfred, who was already very angry and couldn't hold it anymore, told her not to play around because he would destroy her here. Unfortunately, Lucille said she didn't have time to entertain Alfred. After snapping her fingers, a magic circle appeared on the floor. She waved and said to be careful, and invited them to do their best. Alfred tried to stop her, but the girl had disappeared. All spectators tensed seeing it. After the trial duel, a week passed. Lucille's whereabouts were still unknown. The investigation yielded no results. The only information obtained was her motive related to that cross ring. That was the only clue she left. Although Lure was seriously injured and a victim of Lucille's deception, but he had been arrested for the serious mistake of losing his cross ring. With the loss of the ring and one arm, Lure's power now remained less than half his original power. And their father must have received the news very badly. He looked very weak, and said that this time it was his fault. Being family didn't automatically mean they truly understood each other. There were depths that could never be reached without truly talking to each other. At some point in the journey, they forgot something very basic. They should talk more openly to each other, precisely because they were family. Past mistakes couldn't be fixed. However, they could reflect on those things and learn from them, so as not to repeat the same mistakes. The truly important question was where to go next. After leaving his father's room, Alfred calmed himself on the roof until Charlotte called, making him quickly come down. She said she wanted to properly thank him for her necklace, because Alfred had removed that necklace from her. Charlotte then showed her neck, which no longer wore the necklace. Alfred just OE'd, apparently only for that matter. However, the girl was offended, because for her it was everything. She then asked Alfred to close his eyes. Alfred was shocked, but Charlotte forced him. Finally, the young man agreed and closed his eyes. Charlotte then kissed his lips, making Alfred immediately stare. Charlotte's face flushed. She admitted that was her first experience. From now on, she would be under Alfred's supervision. The young man breathed with difficulty. He couldn't speak, and his nose bled, making Charlotte panic. Especially when Alfred fainted. Charlotte screamed in panic, making Mangacap hurry over. And that's how both started their path together. Through joys and sorrows, peace and difficulties. Mangacap hoped these precious moments would continue to eternity.